listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
They've turned the clock back, at least in Britain, but all the way to the 19th century, just as we'd all like to turn the clock forward to the day when we can get back to the lives that we were leading before. The British government under Boris Johnson, a slightly Dickensian figure, in any case, is bringing back Oliver Twist. Please, sir, can I have some more? As 1 million children are told that the dining room door is being closed in their face during the Christmas holiday. Despite the heroic efforts of the pride of England, Sir Marcus Rashford, as he will one day undoubtedly be, is shaming not just the government, but also the official opposition. And what's happening in the United States of America? Well, radio royalty, Katie Halper, will be joining us to discuss that very thing. And of course, we'll be talking to British psephological royalty, Professor Sir John Curtice, the man who knows everything about British politics, at least the numbers. Sometimes his opinions are a little bit off. Well, fasten your seatbelts, because this is going to be rock and roll radio with pictures. 1.2 million people viewed this show last week, our fourth straight 1 million plus show in a row. Let's make it another one tonight. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
This is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to SputnikNews.com. Though because of the time change, it might be that you're joining us a little bit late on SputnikNews.com. You can watch the first hour on YouTube or on Facebook. Or if you're in the Washington, D.C. area of the United States, you can listen in crystal clarity on FM on 105.5. Those are the magic numbers there. Or on AM from Burning City to Burning City, right across the United States, from coast to coast. And 1.2 million plus of you last week watched the show as well as listened to it. And if you are one of those this evening on Facebook, then please press the button which says share. Share it with all of your friends, all of your followers and contacts on Facebook, because we intend to stay above the 1 million baseline that we have now established for what has become a global open university of the airwaves. There are no tuition fees, there are no commercial breaks, and you are positively encouraged to speak back to the teacher. That would be me, undereducated though I may be. We eschew no issue here or any point of view. The lines are open. Anyone is entitled to call us, and I hope that you will do so this evening. You can also watch on YouTube, of course, on my own YouTube channel or RT's multiple YouTube channels. You can watch on Instagram, you can watch on Twitter, you can watch on Twitch, and I think one or two other platforms of which I'm currently unaware also. This is growing and growing and growing, and the reason for that is because we eschew no issues and we exclude no point of view. This is the closest you're going to get to free speech, radio and television, which is why none of the mainstream media ever mention our existence, even though our audience sometimes is on multiple, by an order of magnitude, a multiple increase on their audiences. So you're in good company. I'm in good company because you've had the good taste to tune in to the mother of all talk shows. I mentioned in the talk up that the clocks went back in Britain today. It's next week before they do in the United States. But the clocks went back in Britain to the 19th century, when in the middle of a pandemic, an economic collapse, mass unemployment, the immiseration of millions of working class people, the government set its face, slammed the dinner hall door in the face of Britain's poorest children. Just over 1 million of them. A mere bagatelle, loose change down the back of the sofa. Compared, for example, to Eat Out to Help Out, that Rishi Sunak paid Britain's restaurateurs millions and millions of pounds of your money to boost their businesses. Good, I enjoyed it. It was a good thing. But in the wake of that, to slam the dinner hall door on 1 million poor children who in the summer holidays did get a free school meal, because for many of them, that's the only square meal that they'll get in a day, because their parents are too poor to provide proper sustenance for them. Now, we can argue about whether anyone should be on free school meals, whether our people should be so impoverished that their children can't afford the price of a school meal. We could argue that. I myself was on free school meals throughout my life in primary and secondary school. In fact, I'll let you in on a secret. My first ever political battle was at the age of 13, when I discovered that unlike in the primary school, we free school meals kids had a different colour of dinner ticket to those that had paid for their lunch. Theirs was grey and ours was pink, fluorescent pink. So as you stood there in the queue for your dinner, before you handed over your ticket, everybody knew that you were poor and that the local authority was having to pay for your lunch. This was a kind of apartheid, if you think about it. So on the second day of this, I began organising a strike and a picket of the dinner hall. I argued with every person going into the dinner hall, whatever colour of ticket that they had, that this was simply unacceptable. It was a stigmatisation of poor kids. And by the Thursday, we'd won. And the apartheid ticket system was abolished. That was my first victory. I've had many great victories since and one or two significant defeats, but it was a great victory. So I don't believe, as it happens, that any child should be paying for their school lunch. Being properly fed and being focused on your school work are one and the same thing. They cannot be separated one from the other. If a child goes to school having had a proper breakfast, if they've had a proper lunch, then they'll be more focused, more successful. And if they're more successful, we're more successful. One of the most repugnant things that I have seen over the last few days in the wake of the pride of England, Sir Marcus Rashford as he will be, his campaign to get free school dinners for the poorest kids during the Christmas holidays in the middle of a pandemic and an economic depression has brought forth from the sewers all the old arguments we used to have before we even created a national health service or any kind of welfare state at all. I provided my own dinners for my own children. Why should I, as a taxpayer, pay for someone else's kids? I thought that those arguments had been won. Not in 1945. I thought those arguments had been won in the wake of Charles Dickens, about whom much more later, in his writings about the Victorian squalor that England was, that Scotland was, that Britain was in the 19th century. I thought we'd won the argument that the poorest amongst us are our responsibility as a society. Otherwise, we don't have a society. We have a tale of two cities. We have a tale of two countries. The haves and the have-nots. The haves and the have-yachts. I thought we'd won that argument about us and always, as opposed to me and now. Me and now. What kind of country would we be if there were poor ragamuffins lining the streets hungry? Who'd want to live in such a country, in the sixth richest economy on the earth? Who'd want to live in a country where poor people were hungry? Only an idiot, actually, because one day all the hungry will climb over your wall and eat your dinner. Don't you see? If you don't look after the workers, those that cannot find work, then you will pay one day the ultimate price for that. Surely we should all go forward together. Wasn't that what Mr. Churchill said when exhorting us to pull together as one people, to face the Blitz, to face the challenge of Hitler at the Channel ports? Wasn't that the argument that prevailed in Britain from 1945 until Margaret Thatcher in 1979? That we are one people, that we are one nation, that we are one country, and the existence of mass poverty amongst millions of our people is a stigma not on them but on us, a stigma on our system, on our society, a stigma that needs to be expunged. I thought we'd won that argument, but on Twitter I've been aghast at some of the people who've been slating this 22-year-old young black footballer from Wythenshawe, one of the poorest estates in the entire country. Marcus Rashford, Dr. Marcus Rashford, MBE, is MBE for a reason. He's a national treasure for a reason, because of his love of the people. And the people are loving him back. Which leads me to the first point I'm going to ask Professor Sir John Curtice. And it was touched on by Patrick Christys on this show on Wednesday on the midweek Moats. Who's advising Boris Johnson? Who told them that it was a good idea to have a war with Marcus Rashford over free school meals costing tuppence in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the Christmas holidays? Who advised Boris Johnson that Scrooge was a good look over Christmas for a few coins compared to the trillion that we have already shelled out, for the most part, $1 trillion? Who advised the Tories that turning the clock back to the 19th century was a good look, particularly in the north? The Red Wall and the great Northlands that lie to the north of it were won by the Tories last December, not 12 months ago. And Tories popped up as MPs in poor places all over the north of England, overwhelmingly because of Brexit. Who advised the Tories that the best way to hang on to those seats was to be a hammer of the north, to tell the mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, that he could eat cake? Who advised the Tories that this was the hill to die on, the hill marked free school dinners for a fortnight during the Christmas holidays? I could advise Boris Johnson better, and I don't even like him. I'm against him. But I could have given him better advice than that. What's on Hunter Biden's laptop? Well, if the New York Post is to be believed, some of the most horrendous material that you can possibly imagine. And I won't dwell on the dirtiest of the things on Hunter Biden's laptop. I'll concentrate instead on the evidence that appears to be there in that laptop that proves the Bidens were a crime family, so venal that when they walked into a room, they got a standing ovation from the Clintons. That's how venal. They knock the Clintons into a cocked hat. They're up to their neck, not just in corruption. Everyone's focusing on the corruption of the Ukrainian deal. Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton have turned the Ukraine into a cesspit of corruption, of mass poverty, and the mass exportation of their workers to go and work as cheap labor in the European countries that will never accept the Ukraine into the European Union. The crime that Biden and Obama and Clinton committed against Ukraine was far bigger than the personal crime of making millions out of the misery of post-coup Ukraine. We'll be talking to Katie Halper about that and about whether Donald Trump is going to be dancing YMCA style on November 3rd, which is only, I think, 9 days away. Can Trump prove to be the new Lazarus? Can he resurrect himself from the apparent political grave that his madness and the coronavirus seem to have laid him cold in? We'll be talking to the doyen of political scientists in Britain, the dean of the Faculty of Psephology, Professor Sir John Curtice, about who advised the Tories to pick a fight with Marcus Rashford and how come Keir Starmer is such a stumer that he's still behind Boris Johnson in the polls. Literally, a scarecrow in the fields would be able to be 20 points ahead, to coin a phrase, of Boris Johnson, but not Sir Keir Starmer. En passant, I've just moved to the Scottish borders and there was an earthquake there today. Yes, an earthquake near Dumfries. It was only 2.0 on the Richter scale, but it was an earthquake. My return to Scottish politics might turn out to be an earthquake too. I hope a lot bigger than 2.0 on the Richter scale. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system. Announcing the commencement of the midweek purge sanctioned by the mother of all talk shows. Conversations and debates of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during midweek Moats. All topics are non-restricted. Moats legends of ranking 10 have been granted immunity and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all topics, including conspiracies, will be legal for 3 continuous hours Wednesday nights. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until Wednesday evening at 11 p.m. when Moats Extra concludes. Blessed be our new midweek Moats, with George Galloway, bare knuckle. A University of the Airwaves reborn. May God be with you all.
George George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
That was very good, Simon. You're good at this. Very, very good. He's talking, of course, about the midweek moats, which for the price of half a cup of coffee in your popular hostelry, you can watch between 8 and 11 London time on Wednesday nights. George Galloway, bare knuckle. I think myself, it's something to see. Now, here is the first poll of the evening. I haven't seen this yet. As a second wave sweeps across the world, which country is best dealing with the COVID crisis? United States, United Kingdom, Sweden. Interesting choice of 3 countries there. I'm not sure. Well, I've kind of got a favourite in that, but only just. So you can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. You can send me tweets, of course, on the RTUK and George Galloway Twitter feeds. Thank you very much, my dear grandson, Sean, now a student. I knew him when he was in his mummy's tummy. Now, let me deal with some social media. Gosh, there's lots of it already. Sonia says, you're right as usual, George. Free speech is an essential right in a free country. Sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you is as true today as it ever was. Now, Sonia, I'm reading a truly wonderful book called Sonia. Yeah, I'll tell you about it later. It's about a very, very important woman indeed. Ben McIntyre is the author. It's truly brilliant. And Stephen says they keep trying to force through these crackpot bills. This is the hate crime bill in Scotland. And then they ditch them. Hopefully this nonsense will go the same way. Let's not let everyone forget what they tried to do, though. And Clive says of that particular hate crime bill, crazy, utter madness. Pamela says, has Scotland fallen under dystopian rule? More of that later. And Andy says, what happens if people say hateful things about Scottish people from outside Scotland? Would Scottish police be allowed to cross the border into England to question a suspect? And Fraser says, 100% correct, George. The police should be focusing on the paedophiles, rapists and junkies that rob old grannies and stab people rather than this transgender agenda. And Paul says, I sense there's an uptick happening. Tighten your seatbelts. Darren says, who actually votes for the SNP? Even the Scots can't take these idiots seriously. They don't care about Scotland in the slightest. Wanting to be part of the EU proves that, if nothing else. And Peter says, no normal or rational person can make hate crime rules. It takes a special breed of ignorance and hate to push it onto the agenda. Now, as I said, radio and television royalty. It's a republic, the United States. But if it had a royal family, a progressive royal family, Katie Halper would be my pick for princess. She joins me now. I hope all the way from the USA. Katie Halper, thanks for joining us. Katie, you're there. You're on air. Smile for the camera. She's still putting her lipstick on. Don't embarrass the girl. Still on social media. Ravi says, George Galloway, the undisputed, undefeated heavyweight champion of the airwaves. Thank you, Ravi. That's very kind of you. Peter says, daylight saving time is a complete waste of time. And school meals, Jeff says, eat out to help out, turned in to save a quid to starve a kid. Totally shameful. Wish I'd said that, Jeff. And Basil says, so the government starved the children, and then the same governments get social services to take away those children because their parents aren't feeding them. And Smith says, if the state insists on schooling our kids, the least they can do is feed them lunch while they're at it. Katie Halper is on the line. Katie, welcome back to the show. I'm sorry we caught you putting your lipstick on in the
sorry about that.
In the first minute, but it was a fine, it was a lovely sight. But you missed all the kind things I said about you. Katie Halper, writer and host of the Katie Halper Show on.
Can you guys see me and hear me? Yeah. I can't see and hear you, but you can see and hear me?
I can see you resplendent and hear you.
Okay, great.
As long as the audience can, Chris, everyone's got you. Katie, It's
Great.
been
Hi.
another stunning week in American politics.
Yes.
There's only 9 days to go. Give us your review of where we stand now with 9 days to go to the polls.
Well, where we stand now is that, I was just thinking about how incredible it is that Joe Biden has this really historic opportunity with Donald Trump getting COVID. He could have said, imagine if he had spent this campaign saying stuff like, the socialized medicine that you, as you call it, President Trump, that you assail and vilify, that's what saves your life. Imagine if he had taken advantage of that. Where we stand basically is that it looks like Trump is going to be defeated by someone who has squandered an enormous opportunity to change politics, change policy for the better. And I'm just incredibly angry at Biden because he probably will win, and he'll win without having really learned anything from Bernie Sanders' campaign, anything from the young people, progressives, all the people who are angry about the status quo now, who are angry about the status quo from 4 years ago that got us here. And so it looks like Biden's going to win. You never know. Anything could happen.
Yeah, I mean, you say it looks like he's going to win, and definitely it does on the headline polls, but the swing states are closer. The rallies that Trump is pulling in are quite impressive. Joe Biden can't collect more than a handful of people to come and hear him, and that's just as well, really, because
what are they going to hear?
what they're going to hear is not going to inspire
Excite them. Right. It'll probably convince them to stay home if they go.
Yeah, exactly.
So they should save the
trip. If I went
to
see him, it wouldn't encourage me to go out and vote for him.
Right. It's probably why Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin.
Yes, but Hillary Clinton was, by some order of magnitude, a better candidate than Joe Biden. At least she could chew gum and walk in a straight line at the same time, and remember her name and where she was, and how long she'd been in the Senate, and all the things that Joe Biden can't remember.
Right, or where he graduated, or where in his class he graduated,
Yes,
all those other things,
He's a plagiarist. Yeah. Sometimes he even plagiarizes me. I'm absolutely convinced
congratulations.
Of that. So if he does win, he's winning because he's not Donald Trump, and that's the long and the short of it.
Right. Yes, that'll be it. And, you know, I'm just already bracing for the fact that if he does win, he's going to try to use every occasion he can to kind of scare people from demanding too much. They're doing that now. They're pretending that you have to be moderate in order to win, to defeat Trump, that he's this unprecedented neo-fascist threat. And I think he is. And I'm going to say this right now on RT, and people are going to go crazy. I actually think that Biden is the lesser of those two evils. And if I lived in a swing state, I would vote for Biden. I don't know what people are going to do because this is RT. So now the headline should read that, like, I don't know, Putin endorsed Biden. But I think that what we're going to see is a return to normal, or a return to 4 years ago, or an attempted return to 4 years ago. But there's going to be an officer is going to kill a black man under Biden, and people are not going to get any relief. And so the left really needs to be prepared to just ignore all the silencing and all the discouragement that we're going to get from centrists, who are all going to, instead of saying, don't do that because Trump will win. If Trump is defeated, the next thing's going to be, don't do that, or you'll get the Trumpians angry and riled up. We have to be moderate. We have to play it safe. And that's just not true. It's going to create more Trumps. It's going to create more Trumpism. And we have to prepare for that because they're so good at holding a gun to our heads. And that's just going to be the next iteration of it. And if we don't do that, if we don't get rid of neoliberalism, if we're able to stop this threat of neo-fascism, if we don't get rid of neoliberalism or rein it in, we're going to have, as people have said, a much smarter, much less buffoonish Donald Trump. And that'll be much scarier and much harder to get rid of.
Now, as you raise it, let me refer to one of the more surreal moments that occurred in the last 7 days, when it seemed every centrist, mainstream columnist, commentator on television and in the political class unearthed, this is the real infantilization of the US electorate, unearthed that Russia and Iran, a country broken-backed, a poor third world country that's being choked to death by the United States, were intervening in the US election, sending emails to people in a way that would favor Joe Biden. Now, I asked a number of these correspondents.
Favor Biden or favor Trump?
Favor Biden in the case of Iran. And I asked these commentators, are you serious? The United States is killing Iran. It has killed one of the leading personalities in Iran. It is planning endless sanctions, more sanctions against Iran. But isn't the main point that one side of US politics is blaming one set of foreigners for the state you're in? The other side is blaming another set of foreigners. Can't people in the US own the place that they now are in?
Right. No, you're right. Sorry. Of course, I guess I'm so used to blaming it on intervention on behalf of Trump, but I forgot. Of course, now the story is from Trump people, right? Is that it's Iranians helping Biden? Yeah. No. I mean, I think that it's an extremely infantilizing, as you said, way to avoid actually dealing with where we are. It's an extremely dangerous tendency because all you have to do is say it's Iranians or it's Russians in terms of a viewpoint, in terms of disinformation. We saw that really scary thing happen on Twitter with the Hunter Biden story. I mean, how hard is it for you to say, oh, Hunter Biden did something bad? Okay, well, let's talk about like Jared Kushner. Let's talk about Ivanka. Let's talk about all the Trump like scumbag relatives. Barron's not of age yet, so leave him out of it. But the fact that you have to pretend that this is like it was dubiously sourced intel, it goes back to what you're saying about the infantilization, the refusal to engage in reality, the refusal to look at the root causes of stuff, right? God forbid we look at these things. We'd have to actually engage in people. We'd actually have to give them what they wanted, right? And this is just another way to avoid things like Medicare for all, to avoid solutions that actually improve people's lives in material ways. You just deflect and dodge, deflect and dodge. And, I can't stand hearing the Democrats use language about how, and they're right, how COVID disproportionately affects people of color and Black people suffer disproportionately from it, which is true, which is why their refusal to embrace or push for something like Medicare for all, it's worse than Trumpies almost, because they get how it's a racist thing and they get that apparently that racism is bad, and yet they're not embracing the policies that could actually mitigate those things. So, yeah.
What was on the laptop, Katie? What can we look forward to this week?
This week, I don't know. Maybe let's look at the other kids' laptops. I don't know what's on Donald Trump Jr.'s or Eric's or Kushner's or Jared. Jared probably has like emoji text with Netanyahu with a lot of like hearts coming out of the eyes. That's what I'm guessing.
I'm less interested in allegations of crack smoking and even worse things than that.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in whether the laptop proves that the next president of the United States is a crook.
Yeah, the thing is, it's like we're choosing between two crooks no matter what, right? I guess we can say, to be fair, I think Trump is a more prolific, documented crook, and, the emoluments clause. But yes, who knows what's going to be revealed from that? I mean, at best, we have someone who's going to be, I think the best thing you can say about, did you see him going around the country saying he's not a socialist? Now Obama's getting in on the act saying, trust me, I would have known if Biden was a socialist, which is true. I think they should just have a new campaign ad where they have a bunch of the people who Obama and Biden bailed out, a bunch of the executives saying, trust us, they're not socialists. Or you have some of the people who lost their homes who are now, have lost everything they owned, who are not bailed out. And trust they can say, like, trust us.
Yeah, it's a good line.
Trust is not socialist. It's a good line, right?
The Trump camp, if they were real dark artists, like, say, Richard Nixon's, they would have timed this laptop thing much better. In fact, a lot of these revelations are coming after something like 56 million Americans have already voted.
Right.
And then they wouldn't have hired as counsel Rudy Giuliani.
Oh, my gosh.
Who'll take a walk on the wild side with Borat's daughter into a hotel room and tuck his shirt in for an inordinate amount of time.
Right.
Giuliani's a complete liability to Trump, isn't he?
I think so. I think he's such an unsavory character, even without the hand down the pants with the young girl in the Brat film. I think that, a big mistake they also made with Trump is that it was so stupid. He's running against an insider and a corporate hack. He's not running against a socialist. He wasted his wad trying to associate Biden with Bernie, which if only Biden were the socialist that Trump accuses him of being, which is, again, it's they're not playing their hand well. That's what they should have been playing. He should have been playing more of a populist streak, Trump, and against the anti-populist Biden. And the other thing I was going to say is that, actually, I want to modify that. We should have some bank executives saying he is a socialist, but just a corporate socialist.
Yeah, because
he bailed us out. So we can have two different ads.
Corporate welfare is
corporate welfare. Yeah,
tried and,
expanded the corporate welfare state.
I'm interested. Exactly. I'm interested in your thesis, and I agree with it. That Trumpism isn't going to go away. Far from it. Whatever the result, 9 days from now, and the next Trump is likely to be a much more polished Trump, carrying less of the vulgar baggage that Donald Trump has. Have you got anybody in mind that might be?
Nikki Haley, Tom Cotton, Hawley. Who else could it be?
What about the daughter?
Cruz. Ted Cruz. Sorry.
Yeah, what about Trump's daughter? Won't she fancy that?
Ivanka? Maybe she will.
I'd put an outside bet on that one, Katie. Yeah. So, as this is the last time we'll speak before the polls, would you care to give me a prediction?
Well, the one thing that does scare me is that I'm worried that people who will come out to vote are disproportionately Trump voters because they, don't believe in COVID as much. They either think it's a hoax or they think it's not a big deal because look at President Trump, he got over it. So I am a little worried about those people coming out more than expected. So that's my only prediction. Also, I kind of predict that there's going to be a lot of legal maneuvering. I don't know. Knock on wood, there isn't open violence. There may well be open violence. But I think that I think there's going to be a lot of legal stuff. I think that there's going to be a lot of rhetoric. I am terrified of the stand down but stand by Proud Boys message that Trump sent out. But there could also just be very kind of legalistic attempts to steal the election. And we know that they've already planned that. I also want to recommend a good site called Choose Democracy, where you can look at different ways that people are planning to organize to prevent stealing the election. But I don't know. Just don't. More predictions. I'm going to just say you can turn into my show. I'm doing a lot of live streaming on this very YouTube right here.
The Katie Halper show on YouTube. Anybody who's not doing that already is letting themselves down.
Yeah.
Katie Halper.
And you have to come on the show.
I will anytime.
Great, yeah.
You're if you had royalty in the Republic, you'd be my princess, Katie Halper.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much
for joining us on board the mother of all talk shows. As a second wave sweeps around the world, which country is best dealing with the COVID crisis? A, United States, 4%. B, the United Kingdom, 21%. C, Sweden, 75%. Get voting now on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, a very warm welcome to listeners on the Sputnik app and to 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C., and 1390 AM in Maryland, who are joining us now. There was a technical fault in Washington due to confusion following the clocks changing in the UK. Let's take a break with my RT short for the week, which was on the aforementioned Scottish hate crime bill. Did you hear about the hate crime bill that ended up stirring up, well, hate? If you haven't heard about it, you haven't been paying attention. to what the SNP government in Edinburgh at the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood are up to. It's a bit difficult in principle for an SNP government to introduce a hate crime bill because, frankly, their whole shtick is hate of the English. That's my point of view, it's not theirs. They say that their nationalism is civic and joyous. Did you ever know a nationalist movement that sought to separate a country from another was civic and joyous? I haven't met them yet, but that's a matter of taste. That's not the reason I'm against the hate crime bill. I have fought all of my life against those who evince hate or conduct themselves in a manner that is likely to incite hatred, because the twin brother of hatred is usually violence. The SNP's Justice Minister, Humza Yousaf, has some pretty dodgy connections himself, and he's really not the man to pilot through this kind of legislation. It is entirely friendless. Indeed, one suspects that many in the SNP's own ranks don't want to pass this bill. But outside the SNP, it has no friends at all. All the other political parties are thoroughly opposed to it, and it has united in opposition organisations as disparate as the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland and the Police Officers Union, the Police Federation, the Faculty of Advocates, the lawyers who'd have to fight the cases in the Scottish courts are completely opposed to it also. Indeed, much of civil society in Scotland opposes this, not because they're in favour of hate crimes, but because this bill, if it becomes an act, is likely to make matters worse. Scotland being an overwhelmingly white country, something like 96% of people in Scotland are white, there's actually not a lot of obvious racism against people of colour around. The Asian population in Scotland is extremely long established, quite successful, and has many friends. No, the main axes on which a hate bill would operate are the old traditional forms of hatred in Scotland, namely the religious divide. Now, I come from one part of that religious divide. We probably would claim we have been the main victims of hatred of us because of our ethnicity and our religion. But there are new bogeymen, bogey women, bogey persons, bogey, what's the pronoun I'm searching for? You get my drift. J.K. Rowling, who actually wrote the famous Harry Potter novels in Scotland, who has a house in Scotland and regards herself as Scottish as me or anyone else from the country, though she was not born there. She's been effectively drummed out of Scotland because she's accused of inciting hatred of trans people. Now, I don't want to reopen that old wound, but if you believe that, you'll believe anything. But the point is, you don't have to believe it. If a single person complained about a single page in a J.K. Rowling novel that they believed it constituted a hate crime, the Scottish police, hard-pressed with many other actual crimes to investigate, would be sent scurrying, looking for Miss Rowling to interview her. If a single person claimed that the songs at Celtic Park or Ibrox Park, the stadium of Glasgow Rangers, had so offended them that they thought it constituted a crime under the hate crime bill, the police would be forced to investigate it. If necessary, the lawyers and the judges would be forced to adjudicate on it. It's all nonsense. There are plenty of laws already extant in Scotland that can deal with genuine incitement to hatred and violence. We don't need another one. Calling something a hate crime bill is itself asking for trouble. It's asking for victimhood. It's asking for people to be offended. Now, nobody has the right not to be offended. I myself am offended all day and every day, but I like to think by more serious, more real things. So, I'm here to argue. Ditch the hate crime, Hamza. You'll thank me for it if you do.
Have something to say? Do you disagree with George? Then call us now and give us your view.
And now Chris says on the poll, sorry Gigi, none of the above mentioned nations are doing a good job at coping with containing SARS-CoV-2. You need to look at Asia, specifically China and South Korea. That's my view, Chris. I don't write the polls, of course. I'm only the piano player. But my attitude would kind of be none of the above. It would definitely have to be Sweden. If you forced me to vote on those three countries, nobody in their right mind would vote for the US or the United Kingdom, though 23% of the audience have done so. And Jamie says New Zealand, Cuba, and Taiwan. So let's take a call from Bill in Glasgow on the US elections. Go ahead, Bill.
Good evening, George, and may I congratulate you on moving up to Galloway. Well done.
Thank you. I've caused an earthquake already, 2.0 on the Richter scale.
So I hear. So I hear.
The first earthquake ever in the history of Dumfries and Galloway. It can't be a coincidence, Bill.
Oh, no. It's the white-suited SNP people jumping up and down at the border.
But maybe it's that. Yes, you're right. Go ahead.
That's history now, I'm afraid. Katie was on, and you kind of touched on it, and what I wanted to say was that back in the last election, it wasn't that Trump was that good, he was just better than Clinton.
Yeah.
And it's not that Biden this time is so good. I think he's just marginally better than Trump.
I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't vote for either of them. I don't go with the lesser of two evils thesis in politics because that way evil keeps on winning. So I wouldn't vote myself for either of them, Bill. And I'm not so sure, as Katie is, that Biden is actually going to win. He's obviously the favourite, but favourites often lose, Bill, as you and I know, from the turf accountants.
Yeah. That's true. It wouldn't be the first time. Yes, I believe that the smart money's starting to turn, but I saw it was 50-1 on Trump the other day.
Yeah,
so
it's most likely that he's going to lose. But I wouldn't be as sure as she is, for two reasons. First of all, he's going to win big on the day, because all of his base, which is at least 40% of the country, is going to vote in person. And so all the exit polls and all the counting of in-person voting is going to be heavily for him. And before the postal votes are counted, they'll have to get through his legal challenges to them first. And that may take some weeks, maybe even a couple of months. So there's going to be a state of chaos in the United States, even if Trump loses.
That's absolutely for sure. The word state is the operative word. The place will be in a state.
Exactly.
And we're just dragging him out, kicking and screaming from the White House. But let's wait and see. We'll only got a few weeks left. It
might be a hail of gunfire, Bill, for all we know.
Oh, we'd be so lucky. Of course, I didn't mean that.
His supporters are all armed, multiply armed. So if he does call them onto the streets, or other people do on his behalf, it's going to be, well, interesting to say the least.
It was frightening a few months ago when we saw the marches, and it will be worse.
Well, it'll be an earthquake. Bill, thanks very much indeed for that call from Glasgow. Luke is on the line from Ceredigion in West Wales. Let's hear from him.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome,
Hi.
sir. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. I'd like to first say that you are the only politician that I see who is close to representing me.
Thank you. Thank you.
We probably see eye to eye 90% of the time. Pretty good. I'm sure you'll agree.
Well, I see eye to eye with myself 90% of the time, so that's a good record.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah. So let's talk about the 10%, George.
Okay.
Where we might not agree.
Okay, go on.
So I want to get onto the Orwellian war on terror. Yeah. And I can't logically accept that 2 planes can knock over 3 skyscrapers. I think you can you?
2 brains or 2 planes?
2 planes. I can't see how 2 planes can knock over 3 skyscrapers.
No. The third building is a mystery as yet unrevealed. That's why I call for a new 9/11 inquiry.
Absolutely, yeah, I know you have, yeah. And I can't equate free fall speed with floor pancake theory, Well,
I wouldn't know. I know that I saw the airplanes hitting the buildings, and I know that they fell down.
Were you there?
No, you I wasn't there, but I watched it live. I watched the second plane live.
And like you, I was well. At first, I did think it looked like a demolition straight away, but I kind of I couldn't accept that. It just seemed too far fetched. And anyway, but World Building 7, the Trade Center Building number 7, it would have taken a professional demolition team a minimum of 2 weeks to mine an empty building. So if one building, why not all 3?
That's a perfectly logical point. The only reason why not all 3 would be, why would you have to? If you were going to fly airplanes into them as part of a conspiracy, why would you take the risk? Why would you take the risk of mining them also? If you were looking for a casus belli, trust me, 2 airplanes flying into your most iconic building is more than enough for a casus belli.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those buildings were designed to take an aircraft flying into them. It's all to enable the war on terror, which that is a lot of money was made. A lot of money, a lot of insider trading was done on at the time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I hear that all the time. And
I know you do. I know you do.
You might be right. It'll all come out in the wash of a second 9/11 inquiry. That's why I demand it.
Yeah, we've been waiting a long time, and in the meantime, the war on terror has killed a lot of people.
Of course, the US doesn't require very much in the way of provocation to have wars. They just make them up.
No, but they did at the time.
Well,
I've heard this argument from you before. They did at the time.
They managed to kill millions of people in Indochina on the basis of a total fabrication of the Gulf of Tonkin. So they don't actually need to kill thousands of their people in order to go to war. They go to war at the drop of a hat.
Yes, I agree. But since the Gulf of Tonkin and the Vietnam War, the Americans were absolutely opposed to any wars and had been up until that point.
That can't be true, or they wouldn't have elected George W. Bush.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was bombing. Anyway, I just want to get on to another point I wanted to make was free fall speed means zero resistance from the floors below. Yeah. And which means the lower floors weren't there when the upper floors arrived. You can't fall at that rate with all those floors in between. I built one of the buildings I'm sure you've worked in the city of London, the one that looks a bit like a rugby ball about to be kicked over a post, the town hall.
Yeah.
I worked on that as I've worked in construction, and the resistance of those floors, and I've looked at the diagrams of how that building was built, and I used to believe that, as you, I couldn't accept that they could have done that. And just for the avoidance of doubt, look,
I don't doubt that they did it because they wouldn't do such a thing. They would do such a thing and 100 times worse. It's not it's not that I believe they're not wicked enough. It's that I believe they're not stupid enough. But I'll tell you what, Luke. In the fourth week, week 4 of the midweek Moats, we will be dealing with the 9/11 issue. We found it very difficult to get an answer from the architects and engineers, Mr. Gage. Yeah, he just simply won't answer us. We've tried umpteen different ways. So if anybody knows him, tell him I'm looking for him. Look, thanks very much for that call. The poll is running fast. US 5%, UK 18%, Sweden 77%. You can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. One last call before the hour and the news. It's Anthony in Detroit. Go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, hey, George. How are you doing this evening?
Nice. Yes, very good of you to join us. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, well, I'd be happy to hear that 9/11 re-inquiry because, you know, I got my dad worked in the Treasury Department for 30 years, and then when 9/11 happened, his job got folded into Homeland Security, and he can't wait to retire off that mess. Homeland Security is a
well, we're trying to put that on, not this week, but the following Wednesday, but we'll let you know. Follow us on social media, and you'll hear all about it.
Appreciate it. All right, and then I just had to say, in terms of the U.S. election, it's come down to the final days, but like you said, most everyone's already voted, practically.
I think it's 56 million people have already voted. That is an astounding number.
I know, and there's so many really, I mean, where I am, there's tons of options on how to do it, but I've seen in Texas and in other places, you got lines out there. I'm like, oh my God, what a mess. So it's a mess. But I've seen that, I voted for our hapless hope, Holly Hawkins, of course, but I've been watching the two campaigns, and I think, you know, Biden-Harris, they are offering something different that Trump's not offering in terms of two specific pieces: paid family sick leave, so that, you know, people could take time off work and still get paid and stuff if their kid gets sick, and more funding for historical black colleges. Those are like two good specific things that Biden-Harris is offering. But after watching the debate the other night, I got the impression that Biden-Harris wants war with North Korea. That's literally the impression I got.
They're certainly turning up the heat on North Korea and attacking Trump from the right for having spoken with the dictator of North Korea. It's a strange crossover, cross-dressing in the American political scene, isn't it?
Every foreign policy piece, the Democrats are on the right. This probably last cycle too, but this cycle, oh my God, they're on the right of Trump on every issue. If only for the fact that Trump, you know, he's a showman. He doesn't have any allegiance.
Well, that's right. I mean, Trump can be anything you like. There's no guarantee he'll still be that tomorrow or next week. But it is telling that the foreign policy apparatus of the Obama years, in which I think 7 countries were bombed, more countries than George Bush bombed, in which multiple new wars were started, are ready to take up the reins again in Washington if Biden wins. So anyone who's imagining that Biden will be better than Barack Obama, he'll actually be worse because he's not as good as Obama, he's not as smart as Obama, and he's already laying the ground, as you just said, for multiple confrontations around the world with Russia, with China, with Venezuela, with North Korea. Hey, let's all vote Democrat. Anthony, thanks very much indeed for that call. You can call me on 0207 982 255 if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. I'll be talking right after the news with the Dean of the Faculty of Political Science everywhere, Professor Sir John Curtice. You don't want to miss it. But here now is the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News. The decision by the British government to not extend free school meals for children in England into the half-term holiday has been defended by a cabinet minister. Brandon Lewis praised Manchester United footballer Marcus Rashford for his phenomenal campaign, but insisted that providing help through councils was the right way to do it. Pressure is mounting on the government to reverse its decision. Several Tory MPs oppose the move, and Labour want a new vote, saying it's not too late to do the right thing. Meanwhile, more than 2,000 paediatricians have signed a letter saying England should follow Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in providing vouchers for meals during the holidays. The government extended free school meals to eligible children during the Easter holidays earlier this year, and after a campaign by Rashford did the same for the summer holidays. More than 800,000 people have signed Rashford's petition calling for provisions to continue into the holidays, and the Prime Minister is facing calls to meet the 22-year-old striker to discuss the issue. Spain has declared a national state of emergency and imposed a nighttime curfew in an effort to control a new spike in COVID-19 infections. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said the curfew between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. would come into force tonight. Under the emergency measures, local authorities can also ban travel between regions, he said. Sanchez also said he would ask Parliament to approve an extension of the new rules from 15 days to 6 months. Spain was hit hard during the first wave of the pandemic earlier this year and imposed a much more restrictive lockdown, one of the toughest in the world. And like many other European countries, it has now been hit by a second wave of infections. The United States has reported its second highest day of new COVID-19 cases, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. Saturday saw 83,718 new cases, just 39 cases short of the all-time record that was reported on Friday. Health experts have warned that autumn would bring a resurgence of cases, and they say the situation is likely to get worse. Already, the national figure totals more than 8.5 million people infected, and 224,891 people have died. A top Tory MP who is a leading ally of Prime Minister Boris Johnson is calling for Dido Harding, the beleaguered boss of NHS Test and Trace, to be axed. Sir Bernard Jenkin, who chairs the powerful liaison committee of senior MPs, said that the management of the testing system is bloated and muddled. He added, quote, "The test and trace capability needs to move up several gears. There is a sense that there is a lack of overall strategy, and that is the heart of the problem." The chief negotiators for the United Kingdom and the European Union will continue post-Brexit trade talks in London until Wednesday, according to Number 10. Michel Barnier arrived in the UK on Thursday to restart negotiations with Lord David Frost after they stalled last week, but he was due to return home on Sunday. EU sources said more talks are also planned in Brussels from Thursday. The Borat star Sacha Baron Cohen has hit back at Donald Trump after the US president called him a creep and a phony guy. Baron Cohen told Trump, "I don't find you funny either," in a tweet on Saturday before suggesting that he is a racist buffoon. The pair have traded insults after the British comedian targeted the president's lawyer Rudy Giuliani in a prank for his new film. Giuliani is seen with his hands down his trousers after being interviewed by Baron Cohen's female co-star. Baron Cohen, who co-wrote and stars in Borat's subsequent movie film, tweeted on Saturday, "Donald, I appreciate the free publicity for Borat. I admit I don't find you funny either, but yet the whole world laughs at you. I'm always looking for people to play racist buffoons, and you'll need a job after January 20. Let's talk," his tweet said. The British cyclist Tao Geoghegan Hart has won the Giro d'Italia in the final time trial of the 21-stage race. Asked how he felt to win the race, the 25-year-old replied, "Bizarre, to be honest. Not in my wildest dreams did I imagine this would be possible when we started a month ago in Sicily," adding that it would take a long time to sink in. And finally, the singer Adele joked about her recent weight loss as she hosted the US comedy show Saturday Night Live. "I know I look really, really different since you last saw me," said the 32-year-old as she took to the stage. "But actually, because of all the COVID restrictions, I had to travel light and I could only bring half of me," she joked. "And this is the half I chose." The star added she was too scared to sing and host SNL at the same time. "I'd rather just put on some wigs and have a glass of wine or 6 and see what happens." However, she did break into song during one of the night's sketches. The show also featured a presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, played by Alec Baldwin and Jim Carrey. The moderator, played by Maya Rudolph, introduced it. "Tonight we have a mute button," she said, because it was either that or tranquilizer darts. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
You're watching the mother of all talk shows, and I'm about to speak to real royalty. Professor Sir John Curtice is the Prince of Psephology. There's nothing he doesn't know about the numbers in politics, and he has a good idea or two about what plays in Peoria, or the British equivalent, maybe also the European and the American equivalent. I'm glad to say he joins me now. Professor, thank you once again for coming on board the mother of all talk shows. We are going to talk about the European Union and other things, but I wanted your view first on who on earth imagined that picking a fight with Marcus Rashford over free school meals in the Christmas holidays was way to go for Boris Johnson's government. It's madness, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that it plays straight into Labour's hands. I mean, at the end of the day, the Labour Party is desperate for politics to return to arguments about the better off versus the less well off, to try and paint the Conservative Party as the party of the better off and try to disconnect it from those working class pro-Leave voters that moved in the Conservatives' direction in the last two elections. And this row is just God's gift to the Labour Party so far as that's concerned. Of course, it fits into a wider a story and difficulty for the government. I mean, it so happens to be the case that the prevalence of coronavirus is much higher in the north of England than it is further south. That's made it more difficult for the Conservatives to handle, and the fact that they ended up having this enormous row with Andy Burnham again enables the Labour Party to present the story that at the end of the day the Conservative Party is not sufficiently interested in looking after the interests of the less well-off sections of society. So, yeah, insofar as the success of the Conservative Party, 10 months ago now, was basically the result of pivoting politics away from arguments about left and right and better off and less well off and onto so-called cultural issues like Brexit. They seem to have forgotten the lesson of their own success back in December of last year.
And if you'll forgive the pun, this is an own goal that even Keir Starmer can't miss.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and the honest truth is, Sir Keir has demonstrated very clearly that he is happiest, first of all, talking about what he feels is the incompetence of the government. Most of his time as opposition leader has effectively been prodding the Prime Minister's handling of coronavirus. The only really first policy announcement of any note that he made was, of course, in the end to back the idea of there being a national lockdown for 2 or 3 weeks in England. And that, in a sense, was also really a continuation of the argument about the handling of coronavirus. And in a sense, partly, I guess, because he reckons the public's attention is elsewhere, he's not really wanted to talk about anything else. And that's included, I mean, quite remarkably, we had a situation, this time last week, when it looked as though perhaps the negotiations between the UK and the European Union over our long-term relationship were about to grind into the sand. The Labour Party, however, is not very keen on going back to that subject. Sir Keir decided not to go for it on Wednesday. So Sir Keir is certainly not wanting to talk about Brexit. He's not wanting to talk about an issue that many in the Labour Party think cost them dear 10 months ago. So again, they will be delighted, absolutely delighted, that instead we're arguing about free school meals, important subject that it is, but of course in the end a very short-term one, as opposed to what's our long-term relationship with the European Union, which is going to affect this country for many, many years to come.
Now, Boris, with one bound, could be free, of course, if, despite all predictions, there is a deal with the European Union. I have long predicted that there will be. I'm beginning to feel that I was right. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I will say to you straight away, George, I do not follow the talks in detail, but I do read some of the people like Tony Connolly of RTE or Peter Foster of the Financial Times, or indeed Alan Menon of the UK and a Changing Europe, who do follow things closely. And certainly their advice 7 days ago was actually it's probably more likely that there'll be a deal or they're not. There's a lot of theatre going on. And certainly during the course of the last week, the European Union basically seems to have decided to give, rhetorically at least, Boris Johnson exactly what he was asking for, so acknowledging that there were going to have to be compromises on both sides and basically saying, yes, of course, we understand the UK is a sovereign state, and signalling that they weren't necessarily going to be able to keep all the fish that they currently have. And that seems to have indeed been enough to get the talks back going again. The ground on which they're arguing is seemingly from an outsider, relatively narrow. It's about fish, which is a very small part of the UK economy, and it is about the rules under which the United Kingdom does or does not provide aid to our industries. And it is somewhat remarkable that a Conservative administration is apparently desperate to have the freedom to throw money at what some Conservatives would regard as failing industries, not a policy with which historically the Conservative Party has been associated. But apparently that's what the talks are stuck over. But certainly, I think perhaps now we have got to the stage where certainly I suspect that what's going on. Michel Barnier, as we've just heard, he's not checked out of his hotel. He's staying until the middle of this week. That suggests that at least the talks are going somewhere. And maybe, perhaps by the end of this coming week, beginning of the following week, Boris Johnson and the European Union will be presented by Frost and Barnier with the outline of a compromise that they have put together. And then it will be a question of whether or not politically that compromise is accepted.
That'll shoot the fox of a lot of Liberal commentators and politicians, won't it? I include Labour in the word Liberal, because they said he couldn't, and if he does, then is that the EU issue finished forever in Britain, in your view?
I suspect not, George. I mean, I think one has to be aware that the deal that Boris Johnson seems to be trying to aim for is one that certainly, if we go back to the language of 12, 18 months ago, would have been characterised as a relatively hard Brexit. And that, basically it's a deal on goods. It's not a deal on services, which is what most of the UK economy is about these days. And I think certainly one of the things to watch out for is that, the truth is that the proof of the pudding of the public's reaction to Brexit will be in the eating. And it will be in the eating of the first few months. We're beginning to get some realisation, for example, that if indeed, after the 1st of January, and when we go back to the days when we can actually go and visit other countries, we might have to queue for quite a long time to get into countries like France and Germany because we're outside the European Union and we will not be eligible for fast passport access. And certainly in the short term, what will be crucial is the extent to which trade does or does not flow freely. And irrespective of whether it's a deal, it is perfectly clear, given the character of the deal that the UK government is heading for, that there will be much more bureaucracy associated with both importing into the UK and exporting out of it. And there will be question marks about whether or not the supply trains do or do not get compromised. And I think a crucial thing to look out for in the winter, when we may still be in the midst of a coronavirus to which we still can't see the end, if indeed there begin to be gaps on our supermarket shelves, and God forbid if there are actually difficulties with the supply of medicines, then all of a sudden Brexit will be very much back in the headlines and in a way that will be much more difficult for the government to handle. And there clearly are worries about the extent to which business, because of coronavirus, will actually be ready to deal with the bureaucracy of Brexit. But more broadly, George, if you look at the evidence of the opinion polls, basically this country is still divided down the middle on Brexit. Half of us certainly still want to remain. Half of us would say we would still vote to rejoin. And in much the same way as the 1975 referendum, in the end, did not solve the issue. And by the early 1980s, the Labour Party was campaigning in favour of getting out of the European Union. One suspects that actually we will still be arguing about this for quite some time to come.
And yet none of the parties now, neither Labour nor Liberal Democrat, say that they want to rejoin. But your view is that that might change?
Well, you're absolutely right, and in a sense, one of the reasons why it's perfectly reasonable to put to me to say, look, isn't it all over by the shouting? And it's undoubtedly true that that the fact that the Labour and Liberal Democrats don't seem to want to visit this territory, is certainly as it were, ammunition on your side of the argument. The other side of the argument is this: at the end of the day, the Labour Party will need to realise that, by my reckoning, when you look at not just how people voted in 2016, but their actual views on Brexit as of December last year, for every one Leave voter who voted for the Labour Party, 5 Remain voters did so. And the Liberal Democrats consist virtually entirely of Remain voters. And you saw at the party's conference in September, on the Democrat side at least, that actually there is clearly quite a lot of internal pressure in the party, not necessarily to give up on the idea of rejoining. And certainly the Labour Party will have to worry if the Liberal Democrats do go back into that territory. So I think, given the character of the activists and given the character of the electorates that those parties have, at some point, it looks to me that there will be a political space for one or other of them to be willing to go back to talk about Brexit, certainly if Brexit is beginning to look as though it's beginning to go pear-shaped, because the honest truth is the electorates that those parties have and the electorate to which they seem best able to appeal is still very much a Remain electorate.
Now, stretching our remit, because, of course, your particular expertise is in British politics, but I know that you follow American politics also. Do you share the view of our American guest earlier that it is all over by the shouting, that Joe Biden has it in the bag?
It does seem to look that way. I mean, certainly unless something dramatic happens last week or so. I mean, the national polls on average are at best for Trump, 8 or 9 points behind. Now, of course, everybody says, oh, but the polls got it wrong last time. Well, actually, they didn't. The national polls last time, by the time we got to polling day, had Hillary Clinton 3 points ahead. In the end, she was 2 points ahead, and everybody forgets that actually it was the Electoral College system that delivered the election to Donald Trump. It was not the popular vote. But sure, and of course that does reveal the fact that the Electoral College can occasionally go against the winner in the popular vote, and that's more likely to happen to the Republicans. George Bush profited from that as well. But with an 8 or 9 point lead, even allowing for things not going quite so well in some of the swing states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, it does look very difficult to see how Donald Trump is going to get back. And I think probably history will judge that whatever chance Donald Trump had of winning this election essentially was lost when the coronavirus pandemic seemed to get out of control inside the United States, where clearly things, the virus has caused far more health difficulty than it has in most other countries, even in most European countries, and of course the handling of coronavirus looks very bad indeed as compared to China.
Although you and I, sadly, are both old enough to remember the phenomenon of the shy Tory in the Thatcher era, when a given percentage, you probably know it, of Tory voters would not tell bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, liberal-looking pollsters that they were, in fact, Margaret Thatcher supporters. If that's true of Mrs. Thatcher, it must be even more true of Donald Trump.
Not necessarily, George, because I think also there seems to be evidence of what's going on is that, as it were, I mean, although Joe Biden doesn't necessarily motivate people strongly and create a great deal of enthusiasm, the one thing that he's got going for him is that there seem to be an awful lot of people inside the United States who have just decided, well, one thing that they want out of this election is they want to see the back of Donald Trump, and that seems to be motivating voters to the polls. And we're certainly seeing, the level of early voting in the U.S. election certainly seems to suggest that actually voters are going to make it to the polls. And some voters who, at the end of the day, just could not stand Hillary Clinton. And in truth, she wasn't that good a candidate. I think this time the motivation to get rid of Donald Trump is such that actually this is just taking those who are not Trump's true believers. And of course, Donald Trump certainly still has a very substantial electoral base. He seems to be taking them, giving them the motivation to go to the polls.
Professor Sir John Curtice, many thanks again for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. As a second wave sweeps across the world, which country is best dealing with the crisis? The United States, 5%. The United Kingdom, 17%. Sweden, now at 78%. You can vote up to 9 o'clock, I think, on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let's take a 60-second break. That's all.
Barnier said in his latest statement, despite the difficulties we face, an agreement is within reach, if both sides are willing to work constructively, if they are willing to cooperate.
Sacre bleu! 60 billion in les toilettes is the Maginot Line all over again. What shall we do?
We have got to get the Englanders of Treasure Island back on track and get them overpaying for our cars again.
My union friends, what shall we do? We are running out of options.
There is only one thing we can do, mon ami. What we do best.
Warning, warning. European Union reversing. Warning, warning.
George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Now, that was the week. This is where I look back at another crowded, eventful, and often horrific 7 days in the history of the world this week. It was on this day in 1983 that several hundred rather puzzled United States Marines and Army Rangers invaded the Caribbean island of Grenada. Wow, I remember it well. And seized the country's 2 airports and took Cuban and Soviet prisoners. The action, which shocked the world, was ordered by President Ronald Reagan following a bloody military coup by his own comrades, which executed Prime Minister Maurice Bishop and at least 13 of his associates. Hundreds more troops were sent in over the next few days. Heavy fighting continued, but as the invasion force grew to more than 7,000, the defenders either surrendered or fled into the mountains. Unfortunately for Reagan, elections were held in 1984, and the centre-left New National Party won, with Herbert A. Blaise becoming Grenada's new Prime Minister. Earlier, in 1964, Zambia became the 9th African state to gain independence from Britain when Kenneth Kaunda, fondly remembered, was elected as head of state. After taking power, Kaunda partially nationalised the mining industry, the backbone of the country's economy. This was the week in 1994 when Israel and Jordan signed a peace treaty, ostensibly ending 46 years of a state of war. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and King Hussein of Jordan formally made peace at a ceremony in the desert area of Wadi Araba on the Israeli-Jordanian border, presided over by US President Bill Clinton. Mr. Rabin was assassinated on the 4th of November 1995 by a Jewish extremist because of it. And in 1999, King Hussein of Jordan died of cancer. In 1979, the president of South Korea, Park Chung-hee, was accidentally shot dead by the chief of his intelligence service, Kim Jae-kyu. It happens. 5 other people, including the president's bodyguard, were also killed, which seems strange as it was an accident. In a reenactment of the incident required by Korean law, Kim Jae-kyu showed how he first shot the president's bodyguard and then the president himself, whom he shot twice. It was the worst accident anyone in South Korea had ever seen. It was seen actually as an attempted coup, with intelligence agents admitting to shooting 4 of the president's other bodyguards after being told of the plan by Kim Jae-kyu. A bit further back, it was in 1951 that the Conservative Party won the general election with a small majority, making Winston Churchill Prime Minister for the second time. As a matter of fact, I was born under the Prime Ministership of Winston Churchill in the month that wartime rationing ended. But don't tell the wife, she thinks I'm 45. Winnie was a lot better in wartime than he was in peacetime. In this week in 1956, fighting between demonstrators and the Soviet army continued in the so-called Hungarian Revolution. The fighting was worst in the capital, Budapest. Estimates of the number of dead vary from 2,000 to 5,000. The new Prime Minister, Imre Nagy, appealed for calm and promised free elections and a return to the multi-party system. He also announced Hungary's withdrawal from the Warsaw Pact. However, the Soviet tanks returned on November the 4th. Nagy was overthrown, put on trial, and executed for treason in 1958. On the 27th of this month in 1968, in Grosvenor Square in London, trouble flared after an estimated 6,000 anti-Vietnam War marchers faced up to police outside the United States Embassy. The protesters had broken away from another, bigger march against US involvement in Vietnam, but were confronted by a wall of police. In 1977, the former Liberal leader, Jeremy Thorpe, denied to journalists any involvement in a plot to kill one-time friend Norman Scott, as well as suggestions that he had a homosexual relationship with the former male model. Thorpe went on trial but was eventually acquitted. His reputation, however, was not. Male model, it used to be such a loaded phrase. Like in the obituaries when they used to say, he never married. A day later, on the 28th of October in 1962, the world breathed a collective sigh of relief after the US and Russia reached an agreement to end the immediate threat of nuclear war. Russia had been setting up nuclear missile bases in Cuba, but the announcement ended that threat. US President John F. Kennedy welcomed Russia's announcement that it would dismantle the missiles. It was the week in 1975 when the dictatorship ended in Spain after 36 years of fascism, when General Francisco Franco announcing that the heir designate to the Spanish crown, Prince Juan Carlos, would take over as the provisional head of state. Now, it may claim to be the mother of all parliaments, but Britain didn't admit women into the unelected second chamber, the House of Lords, until 1957, when the government revealed details of plans to reform the place, although not by much, which included creating the first women life peerages. And for viewers of The Crown, of which I'm one, it was the week also when the Queen's sister Margaret called off her plans to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend after pressure because he had been divorced. Nowadays, it's almost a prerequisite to be in the royal family that you have been divorced. And the week also in 1984 when the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, was killed by assassins in New Delhi. She was shot by her Sikh bodyguards after she had authorized military action to remove armed Sikhs from the holy Golden Temple at Amritsar. And finally in this week, in 2003, one of the world's longest-serving leaders stepped down. The Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, handed over power after 22 years in office. He did return, though, in 2018 as Prime Minister, and he was 92 at the time. So there's still hope for me. Still hope for Tun Mahathir also, because I think he'll be back as Prime Minister before the end of the year. I'm pleased to say I know him well. Let's take some calls. There's Ian in Hounslow on the Scottish hate crime bill. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George. It's totally bizarre, this hate crime bill. Now, I've been a victim of this kind of ideology myself. I was taken to the police station at Charing Cross by the Parliamentary Liaison Squad. I don't know if you know them.
No, I don't. I'm glad to say. Tell me about them.
Well, they're supposed to. They were set up after the murder of Joe Cox.
Okay.
But they're not very busy at the moment, so they're going round armed to citizens who send letters to MPs that they don't like.
My goodness. Tell us.
Well, Naz Shah was appointed the community cohesion spokesperson by Mr. Starmer in April. And I pointed out a few flaws in her character for the position, such as belittling the suffering of the Rotherham grooming victims and her suspension for anti-Semitism, calling for the destruction of Israel.
And what terms did you write this in, and where did you write it?
Well, I emailed it to her. I said, I'm sure the victims of the Paki grooming gangs, female genital mutilation, forced marriages, honour killings are happy your appointment. And I pointed out that some of my colleagues, as I'm a former nurse, were sexually assaulted by the same type of people. I'm told they had to put up with it because of ethnic sensibilities. So I was a bit rude to her, but I was pushed.
How rude were you? Were you threatening in any way?
No, it was basically ridiculing her. Ridiculing her appointment.
Well, we all get ridiculed, whether rightly or wrongly. That wouldn't seem likely to send armed police round to your home, but that's what happened to you, was it?
Exactly. I wasn't at home, I would have been carted off in the meat wagon. And I was left a note, incorrectly spelt, by the way, so I think that gives you a sort of a window into these people. And I was invited to attend the police station and discuss this email. Quite wisely, I engaged a solicitor, and during the interview, they produced another email that I'd sent to Stella Creasy regarding the gang rape of that young girl in Cyprus and how the 12 perpetrators got away with it. And I said, your husband, who's a member of the Labour Friends of Israel, didn't say anything about it, and yet you are making your campaign for misogyny to be a hate crime. And I pointed out maybe someone else should be heading up that cause. And she didn't like that either.
So she sent that, both of these ladies sent that on to the police, and the police came round to you, and you went into the police station.
Yes.
Were charges laid or threatened?
I was interviewed under caution, and I was invited to admit that I was a racist.
And did you?
Not blooming lightly, George. Not blooming lightly.
And no charges were forthcoming?
Well, not at the moment. The thing is, what they didn't know, my late wife was half Indian, half Chinese, and I was an anti-racist activist during my time in the health service against people who were being racially discriminated against, mainly staff. So I'm quite comfortable with people trying to stick that label on me.
Yeah, me too. It happens to me from time to time also. Ian, thanks for a window on what can happen when politicians fashion a hate crime bill to protect themselves. Graham is in Ayrshire. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Graham.
Hi, George. Good to speak to you. I've been listening to you since I was a teenager, so you've given me quite an education over the years since you were in the sport. And I've never called in, I'm not quite the same level of orator that you are, but I thought if I was going to, I might as well do it on this issue.
Good.
Tonight's poll, the options we're given on it aren't so great in the sense that we have a choice between three countries that seem to be pursuing a very laissez-faire approach to handling the COVID virus and the crisis that comes with it. And it's a bit of a concern for me because I've noticed, and I think probably a lot of people have in the media lately, there's been this kind of push towards herd immunity as a strategy. And if you look at the outcomes of these countries compared to other countries, comparable countries, they're always doing worse in just about every metric. And that includes economic as well as the health side of things. I think last week you said something about opposing lockdowns. Did I hear you correctly on that?
Well, I would have. What I said last week is what I'm going to say again to you now, which is if I had been running the country right at the beginning of this crisis, there would have been a total Chinese-style lockdown in this country. Nothing would have moved, and nothing would have come in, and nothing would have gone out. And we would have fumigated everywhere. We would have created, as has happened, though now they're knocking it down in Scotland, in Glasgow anyway, we would have created standalone coronavirus emergency hospitals so that everyone who had other ailments could still go to the hospital without fear either of overwhelming that hospital or catching the coronavirus themselves. As the Irishman famously said, when asked the road and the miles to Dublin, he answered, I wouldn't have started from here. So I wouldn't have started from here. And as a regular listener, you'll know, I endlessly proselytized all of this year for the total mobilization of the state, its armed forces, its health service, and so on. But I think that we are beyond that now. We're too late to do that now. And it seems to me that the argument for this government, with its emaciated tracking and tracing capacity, it's almost non-existent track and trace, despite the expenditure of £12 billion. I don't think these lockdowns are going to do any good.
Could I come back on that?
Yeah,
for you,
of course.
George? Because this is where I tend to disagree, and it's not so much that I think the lockdowns in the present format are a good thing. I think it's quite useless actually, because what they're effectively going to do is lock down. We're going to have a few weeks where the numbers come down, but as soon as that ends, we'll end up shooting right back up again. That's not much good. Yeah. But you did mention test and trace, and I think this is the point I would really like to hammer home, because I think we should be screaming about this from the rooftops at every single opportunity. We have seen it demonstrably in other countries. We've seen it in China, Taiwan, Korea, Vietnam, New Zealand. They're using test and trace as a system that can work. And this is also being promoted by the Independent Sage Group now as a strategy to get us out of this. And that was the Independent Sage Group, for anyone who doesn't know, was set up by Sir David King, and that was in response to ostensibly political interference by Dominic Cummings at the Sage Group, which advises the government. But I think it's so vital to go for this. Even, and I understand what you're saying, the government's not doing a good job at all, but there's a very specific reason for that, and that's the privatisation of the system.
Yeah, of course, and our own doctor, Ranjeet, has been equally endlessly making this point here on this show, and I'm sure he'll do so again in the third hour. But, you know, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. We're not going to have a new government by the time we end the next lockdown. No. We're not going to end privatization. So you're asking me to support a lockdown in the current configuration of circumstances. No. And I can't. I can't.
I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't say for the current circumstances. I think our demand should be greater than that. I think we should be demanding that we actually move towards a nationalised test and trace system, and that's what's being proposed by the Independent Sage Group. Yeah.
I am demanding that, Graham. The problem is Keir Starmer isn't demanding that, and he is the leader of the opposition. I'm not even in Parliament at the moment.
I believe he is now. I think he changed his position on that just in the last week.
I didn't notice. I didn't see his lips move.
Asking for someone else. Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure they were calling for a nationalised system, and they were wanting to put into local authorities' hands, which is exactly what has to be done. That's what every expert is saying, worth their salt. But the implications of not doing this are so severe, because if we don't have a lockdown, we're really looking at the NHS falling apart at the seams. And then besides that, the virus is only going to get out of control. There was a study came out this week saying that something like 2% of people are experiencing the symptoms of long COVID. That's a myriad of symptoms involved in that, but it includes things like debilitating chronic fatigue. These are things that we're going to be dealing with for a long time if we don't deal with this. And I don't think we should, just because the Tories are corrupt and they're not looking after our interests, I don't think we should acquiesce on it. I think we should be arguing constantly for it, and it's basically not to settle for this, because we're talking about basically this being the rest of our lives like this. No one's getting, going to have well-being. You've
got no faith in a vaccine coming along?
I don't know for sure. I know you've been promoting the Russian vaccine. I looked at the study of that that came out not long ago, but it was only studied on a population of 100 people. I think it was just over 100. Very small sample size. It could be. That doesn't mean that it won't work.
No, it's now been taken by thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people.
Have they released the data?
As far as I know, but we'll deal with that with Dr. Ranjeet in the third hour, Graham. So stay tuned. Great call, though, my friend. Don't be a stranger. You've waited all these years to make that call. Don't wait that length of time again. Let's hear from Eddie in Cumbria on food banks. Go ahead, Eddie.
Sam Caller. There's 3 points I'd like to make, first of all.
Yeah.
I accept that some people are struggling. Okay, that's the part I want to make crystal clear at the start of this thing, because I'm not going to be liked after what I'm going to say in a few minutes. So I accept some people are struggling. But as a person that has helped out at a food bank and has seen people turn up in taxis with the latest mobile phones on, brand new trainers, etc., I find it difficult to say that everybody's struggling.
Nobody's saying everybody's struggling. I'm not struggling. You're not struggling.
But my point is,
you wouldn't be struggling if you ended up in a food bank. If you ended up in a food bank, you are by definition struggling.
I understand that, but my point is, and maybe it's my generation, I don't know, I'm a similar age to yourself. When I was brought up, and I was brought up working class, priority was feeding the kids. It wasn't going out and buying the latest iPhone or going out and buying the latest trainers.
But maybe they had the trainers and the iPhone before they were sacked from their job. Eddie, please, you're talking to me in Daily Mail speak. Give yourself a shake. Everybody, including you and including me, are only a couple of paychecks away from having to end up in a food bank.
George, I would agree with that, but my point is, from a person that's been on the front line and seen it firsthand, it was the same people week in, week out, for months.
Well, but Eddie, look, now, I've had my phone for months.
I've had my phone for years.
If I lost my job, I'd still have my phone. And after 2 months, if I didn't get a new job, I'd be at the food bank too. I have no bank balance. I have no land I can earn money from. I have no shares that I can earn interest or dividends from. So I'm a wage labourer. So are you, I'll warrant. And if we lost our wages, we'd still have our trainers, we'd still have our phone, but we'd need to be desperate to end up in a food bank.
And my point is, which again I'll reiterate, is if I was in that position and I had the latest iPhone, for example, I would reduce that iPhone to a bog standard phone to feed my family.
But how much would you get for your second-hand phone? And how do you sell it? I mean, who's going to buy it? Eddie, don't get fixated on what phone somebody's got.
I'm not. You're missing the point I'm making.
No, I'm not. If they appear in a food bank, ipso facto, they're desperate. Because you need to be desperate to go in like Oliver Twist and ask for something in your bowl.
I'm sorry, but I'll disagree with that from the person that's seen it firsthand.
Well,
some people
let's
class
leave
that as a
food
free handout.
Wow. Eddie,
and I know
give yourself a shake, man. Let's talk about school meals. I didn't have feckless parents, and they didn't have trainers or a mobile phone. But I had to get free school meals. And I can assure you that nobody in a means testing system gets by through a means tested system to get meager benefits that they are not entitled to. If you know of any, then give me their names and their address and I'll report them. Because I'm not in favour of anyone stealing anything from the state, taking that which they're not entitled to. But I'll tell you something, Eddie. I could take you up to the City of London, where they're not nicking £11.99 that they weren't entitled to off the Social Security. They're nicking £199 million through tax evasion, oftentimes tax avoidance, by all kinds of corrupt means. We've got 10 times as many people investigating poor people on the welfare as we have investigating rich people in the City of London. Last word to you, Eddie.
I'll repeat what I just said. I agree. It's not a perfect system, but I agree, yes. The higher you go, the more fiddling that's going on.
Yeah.
That comes quickly to my second point. I will make it quickly.
Okay.
I know for a fact, because I'm connected with companies are telling me this on a daily basis, track and trace is not working because nobody is taking responsibility for it. I've got companies that are sitting on track and trace information since the 4th of July when it started. The local authority don't want it. The local MP doesn't want it. The national government have not given us any way to get it to them for the statistics. So what are we meant to do with it?
Well, the local authorities don't want it because the government won't give them the money they've already given to the privateers and racketeers that have had, just on track and trace, £12 billion of our money for a system that, as you've just confirmed, doesn't even work, doesn't come close to working.
Can I ask you a question?
Well, 1 minute. According to today's news, only 60% of people have been tracked and traced who've been in contact with somebody that has tested positive for the coronavirus. 60%. According to the government, it might be worse than that. And we've spent £12 billion, and all these months have elapsed. This virus can be everywhere, and we wouldn't know about it because we can't track or trace them. So I'd actually put some people in prison for grand larceny. You're talking about people in food banks. There are people, cronies of the government, and people in government, and people in the civil service in Whitehall that have been robbing blind the British taxpayer of billions of pounds for a system that doesn't even work. It would be bad enough that we gave these gigs to cronies of the Tory party if it worked. It would still be bad. But having done it, and it's turned out to be such an unmitigated disaster, prosecutions must follow. Last word, Eddie.
Right, last question then, just for you.
Yeah.
You have a local Labour council that are blaming the Conservatives, yet they're clearly, deliberately, in my opinion, looking the other way when it comes to the track and trace system, and looking the other way when it comes to corona, the infection rate, etc., so that people are getting infected, factual. Then they turn around and ask the government for a handout, which they've just got, I think it's 5.5 million.
I'm not sure you would call it a handout, would you? The local authority is saying that we could spend this money more effectively than your private cronies can do.
But when the same individuals are deliberately manipulating the general public so that coronavirus increases, I would say that's as good as
Well, you should phone the police with that information, Eddie. If you're saying you know of councillors and officials who are deliberately making worse the corona... Well, have you phoned the cops?
Do you know what we were told? Do you know what we were told?
What?
Go away. They're not getting involved in that. Fact.
Well, you've got a Tory MP up there now. Why don't you go to them?
Because they blamed him, he blamed them.
Well, I'd go to a lawyer and I'd begin a private prosecution.
This is part of the reason I come on the show tonight to ask if there's anybody out there that's got the bottle to take this on.
Well, let's see.
Because I've got 84 companies that can prove what's been going on in our area, has put money before health and the general public, and nobody's prepared to touch it.
Eddie, good call, mate. Thank you very much indeed. Let's see if anyone will touch it, as you say. Now, as I inferred earlier, the division between rich and poor in Britain today is worse than it was when Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. I've read everything that Charles Dickens ever wrote. He was a powerful tribune and commentator on the plight of the poor in Victorian England. He was a clarion voice, and the words that he wrote and the books that he wrote still sell 1 million copies a year today, and he's 100 years dead, at least. Imagine my surprise then when I saw what he thought about Johnny Foreigner. There's a new website, a new Twitter handle called How So Then. My wife is the main player in it. And she made this film, which is coming up now, which will open your eyes, about Charlie Dickens. Watch it.
I'm in Hyde Park in central London. This is a royal park, so you could say that it's owned by the Queen, although I think it's unlikely we'll see her walking the corgis here anytime soon. It has been the site of many important events, such as concerts by the Rolling Stones, Pavarotti, the huge anti-Iraq war demonstrations,
give peace a chance,
and of course, Speaker's Corner, where disputatious and cantankerous individuals get on a soapbox and give their contrarian views about the world.
You tell me who's the friend of Britain, Obama or Trump?
Shame on you!
No,
shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you!
I'm standing on the site of the Great Exhibition of 1851. Although it was supposed to show off the world's achievements, realistically it wanted to make one thing really, really clear, that Britain stood alone as a leader in industry, textiles, steel and innovative inventions. A massive towering glass structure was built to accommodate all of these exhibits. It was the length of 3 football pitches and it was nicknamed the Crystal Palace. Queen Victoria visited the site 3 times and her husband Albert was listed as one of the organisers, although I think that's probably quite doubtful. The great and the good of British society passed through here, the likes of Lewis Carroll, of course Charlotte Bronte as well, Charles Darwin, Karl Marx, and of course the star literary turn was Charles Dickens, the internationally renowned author. It's impossible to exaggerate how successful he was. Think J.K. Rowling and then some. Even a century later, his books still sell more than 1 million copies a year. By the time that he arrived at the exhibition, he already had the smash hits of Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby and the Pickwick Papers behind him. But still to come was A Tale of Two Cities, with perhaps the most famous opening line in literary history. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was certainly the best of times for Dickens, but it was the worst of times for the people he wrote about, the poor, the millions who toiled away in the industries that helped to create the fabulous exhibits that were on display in the Crystal Palace, which of course boasted of Britain's greatness. He may have cared about the poor in Britain, but the truth is that Dickens absolutely despised the Chinese, and by today's standards there can be no question, he was a racist.
Consider the greatness of the English results and the extraordinary littleness of the Chinese. Go from the silk weaving and cotton spinning of us outer barbarians to the laboriously carved ivory balls of the flowery empire. Ball within ball and circle within circle, which have made no advance and been of no earthly use for thousands of years.
This was less than a decade after the First Opium War, where the British naval fleet and soldiers defeated China to keep the drug trade open. China banned opium and destroyed valuable bales of it, so Britain went to war to protect the trade. But they did more than that. They also claimed Hong Kong in the peace treaty. A second war followed on the same grounds, narcotics, and this was just 5 years after the Great Exhibition. Dickens compared the might and muscle of British industry with what he referred to as the Little Exhibition, the Chinese one. He waxed lyrical about the power of the British printing press, which produced the Times every single day, and compared it with the antiquated Chinese version.
Well may the three Chinese divinities of the past, present and future be represented with the same heavy face. Well may the dull, immovable, respectable triad sit so amicably, side by side in a glory of yellow jaundice, with a strong family likeness among them.
Another symbol of Chinese backwardness for Dickens was the 160-foot teakwood ship known as the Keying, otherwise known as the Chinese junk. It was acquired, or perhaps stolen, by several British people in Hong Kong and sailed back to Britain, where it was moored on the Thames and kept as a popular tourist attraction. Dickens was utterly contemptuous, referring to it as a ridiculous abortion, a pen tray and a floating toy shop.
The best the seamanship can do for a ship is to paint two immense eyes on her bows, in order that she may see her way, and not to hang out bits of red rag in stormy weather to mollify the wrath of the ocean. Thousands of years have passed away since the first Chinese junk was constructed on this model, and the last Chinese junk that was ever launched was none the better for the waste and desert of time.
Western hatred of China has a long history, although now that China is a manufacturing powerhouse and will soon be the world's largest economy, those with Charles Dickens' outdated views have to be a little bit more refined. To paraphrase Charles Dickens' most famous character, Oliver Twist, please sir, can we have no more?
Very well done, Gayatri and Ron and young Patrick. Very good face and voice for that. That's their first effort. How So Then is the Twitter handle. Do follow it, please, if you will. I think they've got more up their sleeve where that one came from. Very well made. I really enjoyed that. So the second poll is, was Dickens a racist? A, yes. B, no. C, not by standards then. You can vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Let me read a couple of social media comments. Dan says Sweden admitted they got it wrong in the beginning with the elderly. They're now advising everyone to take vitamin D. They're definitely doing the right thing and their economy is still open. Rick says, George, some say they are using the virus as an excuse for a global financial reset. Do you agree? I don't even know what they mean. COVID, Ryan says, we need an external threat to bring us all together. Where the aliens at? And Henry says, just by suggesting and practicing herd immunity shows you how much your freedom-loving government cares about you. And Freddie says, if you think COVID isn't dangerous, please seek help. And Sarah says, very low death rate from COVID-19. More people ill, dead, due to the consequences of lockdown now. That's simply not true, Sarah. 75,000 extra deaths have been caused this year. 75,000. That's excess deaths, over and above the average of the deaths over the last 5 years. There are people who've committed suicide over the lockdown. There are people who didn't get treatment for complaints, ailments, even serious illnesses for which they would otherwise have been treated. But it doesn't add up to 75,000, Sarah. John says it's not a second wave, it's the return of a suppressed first wave. That's why Sweden doesn't have a second wave. I'm afraid it does, John. And Chris says, has COVID-19 made everyone forget about the world's elite paedophiles? And on benefits, Rachel says, I've had the same laptop for over 10 years. Don't drive, cheap phone, not into the latest fashion, and I am still skint. Well, in the third hour, we'll be talking to Dr. Ranjeet Brar about the recent developments in the coronavirus. He'll deal with some of the points that have been made, both in the calls and on the Twitter feed. It's going to be an important hour. I've also got an important announcement to make, so stay tuned for it. 02077 982 255. That's the number to call if you are in the UK. If you call now, you'll get on the show. And in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. You can tweet me at George Galloway and at RTUK News, preferably both of them. But now, it's the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
The decision by the British government to not extend free school meals for children in England into the half-term holiday has been defended by a cabinet minister. Brandon Lewis praised Manchester United footballer Marcus Rashford for his phenomenal campaign, but insisted that providing help through councils was the right way to do it. Pressure is mounting on the government to reverse its decision. Several Tory MPs oppose the move, and Labour want a new vote, saying it's not too late to do the right thing. Meanwhile, more than 2,000 paediatricians have signed a letter saying England should follow Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in providing vouchers for meals during the holidays. The government extended free school meals to eligible children during the Easter holidays earlier this year, and after a campaign by Rashford did the same for the summer holidays. More than 800,000 people have signed Rashford's petition calling for provisions to continue into the holidays, and the Prime Minister is facing calls to meet the 22-year-old striker to discuss the issue. Spain has declared a national state of emergency and imposed a nighttime curfew in an effort to control a new spike in COVID-19 infections. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said the curfew between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. would come into force tonight. Under the emergency measures, local authorities can also ban travel between regions, he said. Sanchez also said he would ask Parliament to approve an extension of the new rules from 15 days to 6 months. Spain was hit hard during the first wave of the pandemic earlier this year and imposed a much more restrictive lockdown, one of the toughest in the world. Unlike many other European countries, it has now been hit by a second wave of infections. The United States has reported its second highest day of new COVID-19 cases, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. Saturday saw 83,718 new cases, just 39 cases short of the all-time record that was reported on Friday. Health experts have warned that autumn would bring a resurgence of cases, and they say the situation is likely to get worse. Already, the national figure totals more than 8.5 million people infected, and 224,891 people have died. A top Tory MP who is a leading ally of Prime Minister Boris Johnson is calling for Dido Harding, the beleaguered boss of NHS Test and Trace, to be axed. Sir Bernard Jenkin, who chairs the powerful liaison committee of senior MPs, said that the management of the testing system is bloated and muddled. He added, quote, "The test and trace capability needs to move up several gears. There is a sense that there is a lack of overall strategy, and that is the heart of the problem." The chief negotiators for the United Kingdom and the European Union will continue post-Brexit trade talks in London until Wednesday, according to Number 10. Michel Barnier arrived in the UK on Thursday to restart negotiations with Lord David Frost after they stalled last week, but he was due to return home on Sunday. EU sources said more talks are also planned in Brussels from Thursday. The Borat star Sacha Baron Cohen has hit back at Donald Trump after the US president called him a creep and a phony guy. Baron Cohen told Trump, "I don't find you funny either," in a tweet on Saturday before suggesting that he is a racist buffoon. The pair have traded insults after the British comedian targeted the president's lawyer Rudy Giuliani in a prank for his new film. Giuliani is seen with his hands down his trousers after being interviewed by Baron Cohen's female co-star. Baron Cohen, who co-wrote and stars in Borat's subsequent movie film, tweeted on Saturday, "Donald, I appreciate the free publicity for Borat. I admit I don't find you funny either, but yet the whole world laughs at you. I'm always looking for people to play racist buffoons, and you'll need a job after January 20. Let's talk," his tweet said. The British cyclist Tao Geoghegan Hart has won the Giro d'Italia in the final time trial of the 21-stage race. Asked how he felt to win the race, the 25-year-old replied, "Bizarre, to be honest. Not in my wildest dreams did I imagine this would be possible when we started a month ago in Sicily," adding that it would take a long time to sink in. And finally, the singer Adele joked about her recent weight loss as she hosted the US comedy show Saturday Night Live. "I know I look really, really different since you last saw me," said the 32-year-old as she took to the stage. "But actually, because of all the COVID restrictions, I had to travel light and I could only bring half of me," she joked. "And this is the half I chose." The star added she was too scared to sing and host SNL at the same time. "I'd rather just put on some wigs and have a glass of wine or 6 and see what happens." However, she did break into song during one of the night's sketches. The show also featured a presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, played by Alec Baldwin and Jim Carrey. The moderator, played by Maya Rudolph, introduced it. "Tonight we have a mute button," she said, because it was either that or tranquilizer darts. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Tommy says Marcus Rashford has done more for hard-up kids than any politician has in the last decade. That's for sure, Tommy. And Renee says free school meals for children in school should not even be a discussion for a first world country. What is the obstacle here? What indeed, Renee? But then there's no accounting for taste. 45% of you that have voted on my poll think that Charles Dickens was not a racist, talking about a tide of jaundiced people with a striking family resemblance to each other. You just saw and heard how he spoke about the people of China, the biggest population on the earth, even then. But 45% of you think he wasn't being racist. You better vote on my Twitter feed at George Galloway. Now, Dr. Ranjeet Brar, who happens in fact to be married to a Chinese woman, and like me, a big admirer of China, may have been shocked by the Charles Dickens words. I certainly was. I had no idea that a man could be such a tribune of the poor and the downtrodden in his own country, whilst holding the peoples of other countries in such cynical and frankly obscene contempt. I had no idea that Charles Dickens was one of those. Dr. Ranjeet Brar, NHS consultant, physician and surgeon, welcome back to the show. We're going to have to keep on meeting like this, Doctor, because I was talking to a woman from the World Health Organization on my Sputnik show on Saturday, and she was more interested in whether there'll be a normal Christmas 2021 on the basis that there ain't going to be one in 2020. But first, give me your comment on the Charles Dickens comments. How so then are the makers of it, of that little video? What did you think of it?
I mean, it's disappointing on the one hand, and George, I mean, I think I haven't seen those quotes, but I believe them. And those would be typical views of the Victorian era, an era when, Britain's empire expanded exponentially, was at its height. an empire on which the sun never set. And of course, along with that empire and that economic relation of supremacy in the world, England was the leading manufacturing nation and the richest nation. The pound was the currency du jour. It was the global currency as the dollar is today. There's an ideology of supremacy that goes along with that, and that was the colonial era. And it wasn't unusual. I mean, Dickens, as you quite rightly say, was a champion of the poor, and I have a great deal of respect for him, and I've written about him in the past, particularly his characterization of the lot of the poor in Victorian England, his sympathy with the people of the workhouse, which mirrored his own history and the fact that he was, no stranger to poverty in his youth and growing up. So he was a great author, and I have great respect for him. But those are, if you like, contradictions that we see in, for example, the founders and originators of the Fabians, who are a group of liberals who founded the Labour Party, and the Sydney and Beatrice Webb, for example, were the people who wrote Clause 4 of the Labour Party, which committed the Labour Party to nationalisation of the means of distribution, production, distribution and exchange, so apparently to socialism, but were well known to have colonial sympathies. Sydney Webb was, in fact, the colonial secretary for a period of time, and they talked openly of there being, a duty of the British to be the colonial race who were capable of mastering this empire, and had a certain degree of contempt even for the poor working class. So those were, I'm afraid, the prevalent views of that. They're quite wrong, but they were the prevalent views of his time.
Well, as the How So Then video pointed out, the Great Exhibition took place immediately after the first of the Opium Wars, when the civilized British massacred Chinese people to punish them for trying to stop the trade of British heroin coming from India and addicting millions of their people. How civilized is that?
Yeah, quite so. I read quite a beautiful book by Amitabh Ghosh recently, who got a Booker Prize, I think, for his first novel, Sea of Poppies, or the first in that trilogy. It's called Flood of Fire. If your readers are interested and want a kind of easily digestible version of that history, I encourage them to have a look. It will let them see the relationship between colonial Britain, colonial India, colonial China. And you're quite right, it was all driven by an incredible ethos of free market fundamentalism, not dissimilar to that we see in our own government now when they talk about Britain going out to the world and having trade deals with every nation, that the right of commerce and the right of finance was the great overriding right. It was a great civilizing power. They talked about the Chinese as barbarians. They couldn't stand the fact that the Chinese empire, old as it was and dominant force as it had been in the world, could look contemptuously upon the Englishmen, the white men, the Europeans, European civilization, and they actually had advances in their mode of economy and their industry that meant they were, in a sense, a superior economic power from that point of view. But they had an ideology that was very supremacist, and their actions were most cruel. I mean, they drove history forward mercilessly, but in the process caused many millions of deaths. It was the same underlying ethos that led to the slave trade and led to colonialism in general, and it was in many ways very barbaric, George.
Okay, let's turn, as we must, to the latest on the coronavirus. Half the country is locked down. Some of the lockdowns are extremely difficult to fathom. In Wales, for example, the Labour administration there has kept the supermarkets open, but forced the supermarkets to block off that which the First Minister of Wales decides is essential. So you can't buy a kettle. So if your kettle blows up in the course of this lockdown, this circuit breaker, you can't buy a new one. You can't buy a book to read while you're locked down. And so these are foolish blunders, I think, and he will pay at the ballot box, I think, for those. In other places, like Scotland, where we have 5 tiers, except there's no number 5, and the tiers begin at 0. Talk about confusing. There's other places, like the Northwest and others, that are now in tier 3. But a lot of people, I know this, I was there in the last day or two, a lot of people are completely confused about what they can do and cannot do. This isn't going to work really, Doctor, is it?
I fear not, George. As we discussed last week, I think the messaging has been deeply confusing, deeply contradictory. There's conflict between the government and their scientific advisors, with the scientific advisors openly denouncing the policy of the government even as it's being enacted. There's conflict between central government and regional authorities. There's confusion about the messaging even between ministers, and we know there's a great deal of dissension within the ranks of the governing party, between the government and the opposition, within the opposition party. At every level, our political and economic system is in disarray, and our economic system is anyway anarchic. It's characterized by a few very wealthy individuals and a mass who are increasingly impoverished. Of course, there's a healthy middle tier in Britain, people who are okay and will be able to self-isolate and can take necessary measures. But we know economically, with the financial crash hitting, there's a vast and increasing swathe of the population who are unable to comply with self-isolation, even if they want to, and even if they want to do their best. So I think, confusing messaging, but overall, it's this anarchic provision or lack of provision for a huge swathe of the population who are increasingly suffering from the ravages of unemployment and underemployment, and who are fed up, of the lack of support, whilst it's clear that tens of billions and hundreds of billions is being pumped to those who arguably lead it least, the biggest businesses, on, again, this kind of free market fundamentalist mantra that wealth trickles down, that you don't give relief to the poorest and most needy, but rather you give it to the biggest institutions, which are too big to fail, which you say are driving the economy even when they are palpably failing to do so.
Now, there's a young fella works with me. I'm going to bring him in shortly, Dan, who is involved in a campaign around the free school meals issue. And I wanted to take your medical advice on this. It must be true, mustn't it, that a hungry child is not a studious child, cannot concentrate in the way that a child who is properly fed is. Can't believe I'm having to ask you this, because I thought Charles Dickens settled that argument. But apparently not. There are some people, even though they are quiescent to the handing out of billions of pounds to Tory cronies for failing track and trace schemes, who didn't raise a whimper about giving restaurants billions of pounds on the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, who think we should draw the line at 1 million poor kids over the Christmas holidays. Over to you.
I agree entirely, George. It's quite an obscene spectacle. Purely from the medical point of view, there's a raft of medical and educational data showing the correlation between poor nutrition and poor educational outcome. Interestingly, a little while ago, there was a great series that was published, perhaps even 20 years ago, that showed your economic bracket of your parents was probably the thing that was most correlated to your degree of educational success. But it's unquestionable. There are well-known educational theories which are well substantiated by hard data that show kind of, if you like, domains of security of the pupil without which they can't engage in higher mental function, and food, clothing, shelter, emotional security, a reasonably secure environment at home, heating in the school premises, all kinds of, environmental factors which, are not the first thing you think of regarding educational success, which in the absence of these, it's impossible for a hungry child to engage seriously with education, to think and improve themselves on a consistent basis, to behave well. And there's, ample evidence to show that the most deprived children in our society are the ones who do poorest in school, are more likely to be excluded, more likely actually to go on and engage in crime and criminal enterprise, to be involved in knife crime, gang crime, to cause problems to society. And if you think that, purely on an economic basis, you would imagine, which is the manner in which the Tory party think, it would make economic sense to them to, cut all of that spending on prisons, on punitive measures for school children, of knife crime, of gang crime, to educate and feed our children adequately. But certainly, from a medical point of view, it's an unassailable case that hungry children do poorly at school and are incapable of learning, improving themselves, contributing to the economy and society in a healthy and sustainable way, George.
Thanks for that. Now, there's a couple of calls that you've graciously agreed to help me with. One is from Dale in Surrey, who has a question for you. Dale, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. My question for Ranji is to do actually with, it's a hypothetical question. So if, Jeremy Corbyn was successful in December last year, how do you think he would have handled the coronavirus situation? And do you think we'd be in a much better position today than we currently are in with Boris Johnson? And also a kind of secondary point, why do you think we're not following the example of somewhere like South Korea or China, who've evidently dealt with it far better than we have?
Good call, good question. Dale, thanks for that. Did you get that, Doctor?
I did.
What's your answer?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, Dale. I mean, I don't know Jeremy Corbyn well. I've met him on a couple of occasions, as I've met many people. So I think there are things that are beyond the ability of a single leader within the context of our economic system to instantly change. It's very hard to instantly eradicate poverty. It's very hard to instantly put all the funding back towards the NHS and take it away from cronies of successive governments who hold a huge amount of funding. But I think it's very likely that he wouldn't have made some of the most egregious errors that Boris Johnson had taken, for the simple fact that whatever you say about him, whether you're his friend or your enemy, it was evidently the case that his moving spirit was to try and address the welfare and inequality of some of the poorest people within our society, and that was overwhelmingly his core message. And addressing those issues does make you more able to adequately, ask people to test and isolate if there's adequate support. I'm sure he wouldn't have made the same mistakes on, free meals. I'm sure that he would have tried to address some of the inequalities within the system. So I don't think anyone could possibly have, managed the situation worse than our current administration. But I think, there are other issues, deeper issues, because if you look over 40 years of what's happened to the National Health Service, it's been successfully privatised by both Labour and Tory party alike.
Quite. And of course, that's the reason why, that's one of the reasons why he's no longer the leader. But thanks, Dale, for that. One more call, Doctor. Gilbert is in New York. Let's hear from him. Gilbert.
Yes. You hear me?
Yes, very well. Very well. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to know something. I've been to a couple of countries like Ukraine, Uganda, Colombia, Bahamas, and now we have to wear masks everywhere we have to go in other countries. When this is going to end? I've never been to Russia, but, I want to go there one day. I mean, when this mask is going, norm and airplanes is going in. Is this the issue of the
I'll tell you what,
order?
Gilbert. I wear a mask on a plane and did so long before the coronavirus because my wife is from the East, from Indonesia. It is normal for them on a plane to wear a mask because you're flying in a cigar tube with a few hundred other people, and there's likely to be a lot of germs around, and I don't like to catch them. A comment from you on that, Doctor?
Sure. I'm afraid I didn't hear the question, but I heard your response. I presume it's about whether masks are effective
masks on planes, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's like the mask question in general. So I'm a surgeon. I wear a mask during operations. There is some evidence to suggest that after a few hours, the masks are not that effective, but we wear them because we know they reduce the rate of transmission of viral particles and germs. They don't totally eradicate them. They're not 100% secure. They're not, totally sealed systems, which obviously are much more effective. But if you look on a population-wide basis, then overall they have a dampening effect. And a dampening effect, even if it's 30 or 40% of transmission reduction, that makes a big impact on a societal level. Clearly, there are nations like Sweden that didn't use those measures. There are others, like, as you say, many countries in the Far East who use them religiously even before a coronavirus for protection against other viruses. So they are effective. They're not totally effective, but they have an impact.
One question from an earlier caller, thank you for that, Gilbert, was Graham in Ayrshire on the Russian vaccine. He seemed to think far fewer people, by an order of magnitude, have had this vaccine than I think have had it. What's your take on the Russian vaccine so far?
I'm not sure of the actual numbers who are taking it. Essentially, they've as you know, they've been the first vaccine, the Sputnik 5 vaccine, which has got governmental approval and has rolled into production. But still, in terms of its administration, it's being very closely monitored, essentially like a phase 3 trial. Despite that, there are many governments around the world who have brought tens of millions of doses. They're beginning its trial in India as of this week. The president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, who is an extremely right-wing president, closely allied to Trump in the United States, where they can't be harbored of any political softness on Russia and China. They have actually made moves to acquire the vaccine, both vaccines actually, from China and from Russia. So I think all the evidence so far is that it is an effective vaccine. We'll get more data as it unfolds, but essentially it's being given to large numbers of personnel, mainly teachers, medical personnel and the military personnel, as I understand it, who are considered at particularly high risk in terms of their frontline worker status. They're continuing to give it out. High-profile people have had it, including the family of their president, of Vladimir Putin. So as far as I'm concerned, all the evidence so far is that it's an effective vaccine. More data will come out. And the world will be fully appraised of that. Essentially, there's a lot of political negativity from enemies of Russia and enemies of China about their vaccines, but they are the front runners at the moment in the world production, the race to produce a vaccine which can help in dealing with this pandemic. So my overall feeling is it's a safe vaccine.
Dr. Ranjeet Brar, thank you for joining us as always on the mother of all talk shows. Much appreciated. Let's take a call before the break. Andy in Perth, in Scotland. Go ahead, Andy.
Hi, George. How are you?
Yes, good, sir.
Big fan of you and Dr. Brar. I think the only thing I disagree with you about Scottish independence, but it's not about that. It's not about that.
No.
I was unfortunately hospitalised with COVID back in the 1st of April,
really?
10 days after first having symptoms.
How long were you in, Andy?
I was in twice. I was in 3 days and then got home again, then started struggling to breathe, so got taken back in for another 3 days. But they don't want to keep you in any longer.
No.
Then you have to be
Were you on a ventilator at any point?
I wasn't. I was on oxygen for the first 24 hours, but luckily I wasn't on a ventilator. But I had an awful problem with being sick. I couldn't stop being sick and raising temperature, so...
I'm very sorry to hear that. You sound bright enough now. I hope it continues.
Yeah, but I still do have some issues 7 months on, but what I'd like to share you is my experience in Tayside in the hospitals. Back I was in the 1st of April, but as regards old people going to care homes, I don't know, but I know there's been issues other places, but in Tayside, even then, anybody going to a care home or other NHS facility had to get 2 negative tests before they were allowed out of there. And the point you made about if you'd been in charge of things, what you were saying about having a designated COVID hospital, my wife's an ICU nurse as well, incidentally, but in Tayside, Nine Wells was a COVID hospital, whereas PRI was a clean hospital. Anybody with COVID went to Nine Wells. So they were maybe a bit ahead of the game compared to some other places.
Yeah, well, there are lots of other places in Lothian, in Strathclyde, where old people were sent into care homes without any test at all.
Yeah, I know.
And without any PPE for the staff in the care home.
I know. And then there was Skye, there was care workers coming up from Kent and everything.
Exactly. I know you're a nationalist, you said so, but the Scottish Health Service has not done any better than the English Health Service, and both of them have done amongst the worst in the world.
There's been issues everywhere, isn't there? So, I mean, when I say nationalist, I support independence, but it doesn't have to be the SNP running an independent Scotland. I'd like to see you in an independent Scottish Parliament.
Well, there you go, Andy. Thanks for that. I really mean it when I say I wish you a full recovery and a quick one. And regards to your good wife working in ICU in the NHS, really appreciate it very, very much. Now, I told you about a young lad working with me. He's here every week, and we greatly depend on him. But he does lots of other things too. And one of those is a campaign around the issue of free school meals. Dan, thanks for stepping in. Are you able to summarise, because time is running, what your campaign is and how people can support it?
So our campaign is actually to back Marcus Rashford's campaign. And, you know, anyone that thinks, as we do, that it's absolutely incredible that a 22-year-old footballer is showing up the entire government on...
And opposition.
And the opposition, on such fundamental issues such as should children in our country go hungry. I mean, it's absolutely insane that we have to do this, but there's near 1 million children hungry now, and that's only going to increase. So we're joining in with his campaign. We want everyone to get involved and support it, so we're putting our full support behind that. And people can find that on endfoodpoverty.org, and they can get in touch and find people in their area to work with us on this campaign. And, you know, if Westminster won't listen, then we'll talk to local authorities and councils about trying to find food for these children that desperately need it.
Well, I'm fully behind you, as you know. In fact, I think I was the first to be so. Endfoodpoverty.org.
That's right.
Go to it, please, right after the show. Dan, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
For briefing us on it. Let's take a quick break to let Dan get out the studio, apart from anything else. There are people known to me who've suffered from a virus that Kate thinks doesn't exist. We better hear why she thinks that.
I know a paramedic who told me that they're told to put their sirens on and drive around with the sirens on, so it looks like they're busy. They are being told...
Who would tell them?
That if
that's quite a serious allegation. Who told ambulances to drive around with their sirens on so that it looks like they are busy? Can you give us a name?
Well, I'm open to nurses and doctors and patients. I know how they've been threatened. I know what's been happening.
Threatened?
We have a barrister to...
Did you say threatened?
Please allow me to finish, George.
Did you say threatened? I want to be clear. You said threatened. I'm sorry.
It makes people break, and this is what's happening. And this is why they're going up.
I'm sorry. Can't take any more of Kate Shemirani. A little knowledge is indeed dangerous, as is the pretensive expertise, and then when questioned, well, look, I'm not an economist, well, I'm not this and I'm not that, I'm just a simple nurse.
Wednesday nights just got a whole lot wilder.
Well, that did get a bit bare knuckle, I've got to say, and as you saw, I've got a red button. Nurse Ratched comes in and takes them off to Ward 5. It hasn't happened often, but it will happen, I think, over the course of the next couple of weeks on one or two of the other subjects that we are dealing with. It's a really good show. Anyone who watched it knows that already. But if you haven't, then please, it's Wednesday at 8 p.m. After all, many people said that they thought once a week for the mother of all talk shows wasn't enough. So the details are on the screen. That's how you sign up for it. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Was Dickens a racist? Yes, 18%. No, 47%. Up one. C, not by the standards then, 35%. So you can still vote up to the end of the show, actually, and maybe even beyond, I don't know, on my Twitter feed. Raz is in West Bromwich on the schools system. Let's hear from Raz. Go ahead, Raz.
Hi, George. I'm Raz. I'm 15. I'm calling you from West Brom, and I just wanted to talk about the system in our schools and how they, indoctrinate kids and try to get them to conform to one line of thinking and try to stop them from, giving their own opinions. Like recently, I got an example of this through in history. We recently started learning about the Cold War, and now we were learning about the Soviet Union. And half the things we're learning about were like just lies, complete exaggeration on lies. And the teachers, if you try to speak out against them, put your hand up and say something counter the narrative, they threaten you with detentions and stuff. And in my head of year, even accused me of spreading propaganda.
Well, of course, individual teachers are not always angels. They're not always paragons of virtue. They're not always ready to uphold the standards that they say they believe in. A relative of mine, I don't want to say too much, was actually sitting in her classroom quite recently when her teacher launched a vicious and defamatory attack on me without knowing that my relative had anything to do with me. She has a different family name. She was utterly shocked but very brave and told her teacher that what he was saying was not just false, it was the opposite of the truth. The teacher said, for example, I'll tell you what the teacher said. He said, I was really against Muslims. I hated Muslims, which, of course, is not only not true, but the opposite of the truth. But this teacher said that with my relative sitting in the class. Now, how many other teachers where my relatives are not in the class are hearing such base and baseless propaganda? So I'm with you on that, Raz. The important thing, though, is this. Young people now don't have to take the teacher's word for it. They don't have to take my word for it. Ignorance is a choice now. You can go online and you can find the truth about anything. You no longer, when I was young, there was only your parents and the teacher and one television station and a raft of newspapers all owned by the same kind of people. We've well passed that now. Raz, thanks for the call. Les is in Idaho. Go ahead, Les.
Well, actually, on the border there with Idaho and Oregon. Okay. Over here, we can smoke pot, and just across there, it's, not such a good idea.
Okay, go on.
Well, with the election, we live in onion country here. It's pretty libertarian. Even though I'm in Oregon, I know that my vote it doesn't really count however I voted. But I voted for the only female in the race. It's on every ballot, or on the ballot in every state, and that's Jo Jorgensen, Libertarian, and that's who I voted for.
You voted Libertarian. Do you normally vote with them?
No, I would vote Green, but I just think they're feckless at this point.
Would you have voted for Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, he was I like the Socialist Equality Party. I would have maybe wrote in Joseph Kishore from them.
Anyway, these are all bit players in the election next week. There's only two in the room. One of them's a donkey. The other is a donkey, though one has the symbol of the elephant. Which one's going to prevail, do you think, Les?
Well, it's hard to say. I think even though they have Sleepy Joe in the lead, I don't see a lot of Biden stickers, and where I'm from, I wouldn't anyway, but I don't hear a lot of people I know seeing a lot of Biden signs in their yards. I see a lot of Trump flag waving. So,
and the turnout at the rallies is quite marked, isn't it?
Exactly, and there's that differentiation, and just the same thing that we got from the media before. It's like he's a shoe-in. It's like
That's what they said. That's what they said last time.
Exactly, and I'm not even. But even if Biden does win, like, what's going to change? Not much. They're pretty square on policy, I think. They don't seem to have much difference. It's they might as well call them the bipartisan party and just let them merge together.
Yeah, two cheeks of the same backside.
That's right. And if Joe Jorgensen gets 5%, then she'll get federal funding, federal campaign funding, and that's why I voted third party. And
Okay, thanks, Les. Just because of the hour, I must speed on. Otherwise, I might have quizzed you more on your recreational habits. Jim is in Fort Collins. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Yeah, on Dickens.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dickens, about 15 years ago, I was reading Oliver Twist to my daughter, and in the narration, he keeps referring to Fagin as, he says, the Jew. The Jew walked over to the window, and the Jew. I'm saying, like, my God, and of course I changed it. I just said Fagin. My daughter was like 12.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get into that. If one of the characters, like Sykes, called him an avarice old Jew or something, and he's a villainous character, I could have stopped the reading and explained to her about, anti-Semitism. But this was in the narration. And then later in the book, when Oliver is being sheltered by some elderly couple, he wakes up and he's looking out the window at crack of dawn, and he sees Fagin out there, and he screams. So down come the people who are sheltering him. Fagin's run off. And they say, what's wrong? What's wrong? And Oliver's screaming, the Jew, the Jew. And he's pointing at the window. I'm saying, my God, where did he learn that? Because
I'm perfectly ready to believe that that was in the original. It's definitely not in the copies of Oliver Twist that you would be given in school, for example. Here, it has been cleaned up. But you're right, it is an indication, as is the Chinese material, that Charles Dickens was a racist.
Yeah, and in fact, Oliver is coming from a church workhouse. So how did he learn about Jews? None of the characters use the word Jew. Just the narrator until this part in the book, so it's kind of disconnected to me. So
it is amazing. I do the same with my own children. And luckily I'm quite quick-witted. I actually edit the texts of things that I don't want my children to hear. They're not as bad as the one you've just described, but sexual references and things that are inappropriate, age inappropriate. Yeah. But it is a pity that we've got to do that. It just goes to show that heroes often have feet of clay. And here was Dickens, this great proselytizer for the poor, was clearly also riddled by racist views. And, you could say not by the standards then, as 35% of the people have said here. But to say no, 47% of you saying no is clearly wrong. And you've just given us more evidence.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
amazing.
So I don't. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for it, Jim. Don't forget to follow Household. Then they'll be doing a lot of these things, and it's quite groundbreaking, I think. I think this one will cause a lot of controversy. We'll have Dickens defenders leaping forward. Jim, thanks. Here's Michael in Sydney on lockdown protests. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, yeah, George, and just quickly on the Chinese racist and Dickensian sort of England in general.
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, I'm a big fan of Dickens and his writing on the Dickensian sort of part of the population there. But, yeah, I mean, in terms of racism, my own daughter is half Chinese, and my sister wants to call her a half Briton monkey. So there you go. And apparently I'm mentally ill, and that's why we think I was about that coronavirus. I've been suffering under the powers of the health actors of New South Wales for about 20 years now.
Michael, hold your phone up, would you?
Oh, yeah, sure,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
And I think people are basically sort of waking up to the fact, I mean, this is more than just about coronavirus. People realise they have been ruled by fascists for at least the last 50 years. And basically, they've stripped away every civil liberty we have. They've always used something, be the war on terror, the war on drugs, whatever war they want to declare. You know, we've got to be in a constant state of fear, you know. So over here, we've got a paper called the Daily Telegraph. It's owned by Rupert Murdoch. I believe you may know him over there in England. I call it the Daily Terrorgraph. Because if you're not scared, you haven't read it, right? At the end of the day, it's just about just scaring society. They're stripping away our civil liberties. We will never get these rights back. They want to atomise us and further remove us from the means of production, so we have no means of withdrawing our labour and protesting. And at the end of the day, we have to stand up. This is more than just about coronavirus. And the reason we cannot handle it in England and countries like that is because the horse has already bolted. They should have done if they really cared about the working class, they should have done what they did in China and all the other Asian countries in the first place. The horse has long left the stable, and it's trampling over the poor, unfortunately.
Michael, that was a powerful call. I really wish I had time to take issue with one or two parts of it, but I don't because of the hour. But maybe we'll get another chance to do so. Good morning to you, Michael, in Sydney. Good afternoon to you, Jared, in Pennsylvania. Go ahead, Jared.
Hello, George. How are you doing? I am calling to talk about Bolivia, the recent elections there.
Yeah.
And it was a landslide sweep for MAS, the movement of socialism. And, you know, I just wonder how the Guardian and all these neoliberal shills, how they're responding to this, because I thought that people in Bolivia hated socialism and would never vote for them ever again to be back in power. And it's really quite amazing just how this story is basically being completely not covered in the Western mainstream neoliberal media.
Well, I covered it, Jared, in my Sputnik show on Saturday. You can see that online. I spoke with Ole Vargas, a young man who has shone a light through the darkness in Bolivia for all of this past year when fascism ruled in Bolivia, real fascism, not people that tell you to put a mask on or tell you to wash your hands too often. Real fascism with jackboots that massacred people, particularly the indigenous people and labor organizers and social organizers, political people, massacred them on behalf of a coup which was greeted with ecstatic praise by the US government and by the one or two industrialists. I'll probably spare their blushes, but everyone knows, I think, that Elon Musk actually tweeted that we'll coup anywhere we want to coup. Well, he knows now that you can coup, but you might not always win. And Elon Musk and the State Department, Pompeo, and Trump have utterly, dismally failed in Bolivia. The people have triumphed. And the hero of the hour is the exiled Evo Morales, the ousted president, who's not yet back in Bolivia, but he's back in spirit. And his spirit and his example won us an astounding landslide victory in the last week in the elections in Bolivia. And all kinds of people, Jared, are sick and green to the gills about it. And The Guardian and the New York Times are definitely two of them. Jared, thanks for giving me the opportunity to say that. Gloria is in Southport in England on Sweden and COVID. Let's hear from Gloria. Go ahead, Gloria.
Hello, George. Nice to speak to you again.
And you, madam.
My granddaughter went to work and did in Sweden with her partner about 3 years ago. And, my dog has decided, because I'm on the telephone, he's going to get my attention, so he's picked his bone up and he's throwing it around. I'm sorry about that, George.
No, that's wonderful. It's great when real life intrudes on art. Go ahead.
What surprised me, I was terribly worried about her because Sweden was actively discouraging the population to, they wanted them to not wear masks over there. In fact, when I saw any pictures of Sweden and people in Stockholm, they were all enjoying life, sitting out, going to restaurants and bars, and no one was wearing a mask. But what did surprise me, George, was that quite early on in the pandemic, my granddaughter works for a design company, H&M, which is very famous.
Yes.
And quite early on, they tested people in the design department where she works. And all of them felt perfectly well. And yet 15 of them tested positive, which just shows me how dangerous people are when they're asymptomatic.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, an asymptomatic person has no reason to imagine that they are spreading it and can therefore be communing with hundreds of people who will themselves then potentially catch it, and they may be commune with hundreds of others. This is why it's a pandemic.
But what surprised me, George, was the fact that they had a test early on in the pandemic. And look at us, the situation we're in now with people being paid nearly £7,000
a day. A day.
A day?
A day.
I didn't realise it was a day.
£1.5 million per year is what these consultants are being paid. Gloria, are you keeping well yourself?
Yes, I am. I'm isolating.
Just you and your dog with the bone?
Well, I'm rescuing some chickens. I'm getting them the factory farming chickens. So I'm getting some this weekend.
Excellent.
So we'll have chickens here as well.
Well, let us know how it all goes. We want to know that you continue to be well and happy if possible. Thank you, Gloria. Tarif is in New Orleans on Trump. Go ahead, Tarif.
How you doing? I have 3 comments. The first comment is dealing with Trump and the DNC.
Yeah.
If the DNC just think about single payer Medicaid for all, right? If the DNC get in there, basically they're gonna put in a Barack Obama package again.
Yeah.
Healthcare.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna back single payer. But if Trump and them get in there, what's gonna happen for them to win 2022 and 2024, they're gonna have to start backing single payer Medicare for all so they can win in those 2 years. Okay? Which makes sense. Okay? And they're gonna take their brownies. They're gonna take that playing card from the DNC, because the DNC gonna go more left, okay, if the DNC lose, which I think they will. My second comment, you're talking about September 11th. They got 3 people you need to get on your show. Webster Topley, James Colbert from the Colbert Report, and this other guy that works with Webster Topley that did an investigation on the 19 hijackers in Florida. All these coincidental things that led up to September 11th, most people not looking at, okay? It's very important. And my last comment, 2 things people need to watch: The Minds of Men by Truth Stream Media, that's on YouTube, and also The Spider's Web, the Britain's Second Empire Financial, which is an hour and 20 minutes long. Those 2 documentaries on YouTube will help people out to understand what's going on.
Tarif, thanks for that call. Terrific call in New Orleans. The poll is going big guns, but The result is quite perplexing to me. Was Dickens a racist? A, yes, 18%. B, no, 47%. C, not by standards then, 35%. You see, I could go with C, although I would vote A, but how 47% can vote no, not just because of the anti-Chinese racism we've just shown you, but the anti-Semitism that the caller from the United States adduced in favor of the proposition is surprising to me. Mike is in North Carolina on the U.S. elections. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, sir. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good, thank you.
Well, by the grace of God, thank you so much for what you do.
Thanks.
I am an Italian and American and raised by a single-parent home. And I love what you do.
Thank you, sir.
And I love your ambition. I love what you do. You stand for what you believe in. And I admire that. And I get emotional about that.
Thank you, Mike.
I never had a father. And I admire you. I admire you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
And,
I'm moved by your words. How are you voting, if I may ask?
Well, I'm an independent. I fight for the right where I feel steadying. You know, I have a daughter. My wife is Mexican. And, you know, we just want to vote for the right person. And it's so hard. It's so hard in America where, you know, people are like, what are you? Who are you from? And this world wasn't like that years ago. This was a great country, and I'm very proud to be American. But at this point in my life, I'm very confused. You know, I can't tell her honestly what to do. And I see your passion. I see your passion. I see your drive. And I feel your drive. And I admire that. I followed you very recently, and I see this man. And like I said, I'm at a crossroads, and I need help. And I'm asking.
Yeah, I know.
I'm asking for your guidance.
Unfortunately, I'm going to disappoint you because I could not vote either for Donald Trump or for Joe Biden, and I could not advise anyone else to do so either. Because I don't believe in the lesser of two evils proposition. First, because I'm not certain that Joe Biden is less evil than Donald Trump. But even if I was, I couldn't, because picking the lesser of two evils means that evil still wins. And what is necessary in America is a new political party that stands for the working people and can develop a leadership and a financial base that can campaign throughout the length and breadth of the land and have a chance of winning elections, certainly of influencing significantly the outcome of elections. Mike, there's just no time to do justice to your beautiful call. Please accept my apologies and my greetings to your lovely wife. Because there's a legend on the line, and short of time though we are, we must take Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I'm not going to say what I was going to say because there's not time, but there has been some progress on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, but I'll talk to you about that.
There was. The UN has basically all nuclear weapons are now illegal.
Well, yeah, 50 countries have signed this treaty.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, there's a little bit more to it. So I'm going to leave that and just say thank you for my commemorative biro, which I got.
Welcome.
Which is very nice.
Thank you.
And just quickly, on the World Service, the BBC World Service, there was a program called The Forum, and it was a brilliant broadcast about Paul Robeson. Now, that was on this week. There's also a DVD, which is from a film by Teo Aluko.
It's wonderful.
Have you seen it?
It's wonderful. I've seen him live do it.
Oh, blimey. It's called Mr. Robson, isn't it, the play?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Call,
well, apparently
call Mr. Robson.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and get hold of the DVD if I can.
Oh, well, you must. You must.
Yeah.
I've seen it in the one-man show, and I've seen it in film. And Mr. Robson is the greatest American, one of the greatest human beings that ever walked this earth. Mr. Robson was a figurative as well as literal giant. Paul Robeson is one of the greatest human beings that ever lived. An artist, a singer, a sportsman, a politician, a lion, a man who stood up for justice. I've run out of time. I rather regret. See you Wednesday for Moats Extra.